Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of true, scary stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we're going to be reading some true creepy encounter horror stories. I hope you enjoy them. So, without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true, scary stories. This happened a few days ago when I, a 19-year-old male, went to a festival in a city 2 hours away from my home. I booked a hotel room for 3 days, and this happened on the second day. I had just woken up and was slightly hungover, so I decided to go eat a late lunch. This was at about 5 p.m. I got back at around 7 p.m., and as I was approaching the entrance to the hotel, a guy in a suit holding a computer bag followed me to the door. He looked professional and like he had just got back from some sort of meeting, so I didn't think too much of it. I had an empty bottle of Coke in one hand, so I struggled to pull out my card to open the door. I found it weird that he just stood behind me when he could have just opened the door if he was staying in the hotel, but I really did not realize that until after. Once I got in the building, however, I noticed his weird behavior. He followed me to the reception because I needed to throw away the bottle, and that's when I realized he was following me back to the elevators. When I got on the elevators, he stood a few feet beside me and watched me press the up button. I was getting more and more suspicious, and I got really anxious when he walked into the elevator with me. I gave my back to him and pressed my floor number, and moved to the right to let him press his floor number, which he didn't, and that set off my alarms. I have social anxiety, and I couldn't bring myself to confront him, so I just stood in silence and waited for the door to open. When the door opened, I walked out, and he followed close behind me. My room was at the end of the hall, and he followed me about halfway before a group of girls, clearly tipsy, came out of their room, and by God's graces, I somehow knew one of them. I made a big deal out of meeting her, and they invited me to go clubbing with them. I obliged, and just talked with them as I watched the guy slowly reverse to the elevators and get on one. When we finally went down, I noticed that he was not in the lobby, and I did not see him for the rest of my stay. I really do not know what that was about, but it shook me to my core. Like I said, I have really bad anxiety at times, and this made me feel like vomiting. What scared me even more is that I'm a physically big guy. I hit the gym almost every day, and I tower over most people. So I never thought something like this would happen to me. What freaks me out the most is that he just followed me so blatantly. I really did not know what to make of what happened. But if anyone has any idea as to what this guy was up to, please feel free to share. In middle school, near Cleveland Middle School in 2003 in Albuquerque, New Mexico, I was walking home from my middle school, and I was on my way home when I crossed the road intersection. This road was by an elementary school and the corner of an Albuquerque bank. I was walking down the street when a truck was following me. I looked behind me in the corner of my eye, and from behind me was this truck following me. It was across the street, and it started to pick up the pace, so I threw myself into a bush and saw the men circling the road, I think trying to abduct and assault me and the elementary and middle school students. It gave me chills how slowly the vehicle was moving towards an area where children were around. I never told police or anything about it because I really didn't know if they were trying to abduct me or just driving by the area. Okay, so I work at retail at a small vintage store in a big city, so we struggle with shoplifting. This woman came in and I was a bit suspicious from the get-go, so I kept an eye on her. She grabbed a bunch of merchandise and eventually kind of tried to get behind the counter. I told her she couldn't do that, and it was time for her to leave the store. She wouldn't do so and was kind of quietly saying things under her breath. Eventually she said, "Is my name here?" And I was like, "No, she is not." She said, "Do you know my name again?" And again, I was like, "No, I don't," because I was just more so focused on her getting out of the store without the merchandise. She also said that I'm not supposed to be here if my name isn't here, which is so strange because I'm the only one working, and technically no one would be allowed in if I wasn't there at the moment. What do you guys make of this? I feel pretty spooked. I just got back from work. It's late at night, and I stopped at the gas station on the way. For context, I'm a guy in my 30s. As I pulled into the gas station, I noticed an old beater sedan with its lights off, parked in the side of the building. As I pulled past the car to park, I saw someone was in there. So as I parked, I looked over, and the other car starts moving with the lights off and parks 2 spaces down from me. I keep looking, because this is late at night and weird behavior. I see this guy, mid-50s white guy in a baseball hat, turn the interior light on and just stare me down. Not moving, just staring. I'm like, whatever, and go get my stuff inside. The guy never gets out or goes inside. As I'm leaving the store, I can see that he hasn't moved an inch, just following me with his eyes as I walk back to my car. At this point, I'm holding the knife I carry in my pocket, ready for this guy to try something. I make it to my car and climb in. And after I start the car, I look over again and he's still completely unmoving, just staring straight at me with his interior light on. We are the only 2 cars there. At this point, I'm thinking he's either an unmarked cop or just a freaking serial killer. So I pull slowly out and watch him stare at me the whole time I drive out of the gas station. He never pulled out or followed. Honestly, it's probably a boring story for you guys, but it was so uncanny and unsettling. I wanted to post to see if anyone has had a similar encounter. My mom, a 41-year-old female, and I, a 16-year-old female, decided to go on a girls' trip to a Target to grab some essentials. Once we entered, we headed straight to the clothing section to check out some cute items. My younger brother, 2 years old at the time, was at home with my dad. While my mom browsed for clothes for him in the toddlers section, I got bored and told her I was going to check out the music album and book section. We separated, and I started looking through the K-pop shelf. Nothing particularly interesting caught my eye, but I noticed a plushie on the top shelf that clearly didn't belong there. Someone's parent had probably said no and left it on the nearest shelf instead of putting it back. As I bent down to check the albums on the bottom shelf, a random old man approached from behind and poked the plushie. In a high-pitched voice, he exclaimed, "Beep," as if trying to make me laugh. I wasn't crouched down. I had my hands on my knees. I stood up straight and looked at him in confusion. I didn't say anything, but I was thinking, "Hello, personal space." He smiled at me weirdly, and I quickly rushed to find my mom. I felt uncomfortable but tried to push it out of my mind. I considered telling an employee about the incident, but it was late, and I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. I just wanted to go home. Thankfully, my mom and I made it home safely, and I never saw that guy again. This was about 3 years ago, but I remember the situation vividly as it was very unnerving. It was the height of the pandemic, and a family member and I decided to go to the dollar store in the evening to pick up a few groceries. We parked directly outside the dollar store, and my family member left the car to go inside to do the shopping. I stayed in the car with the radio running, vibing and minding my own business. I was wearing my mirrored aviators the whole time. A man who looked exactly like a young Joe Pantoliano, wearing a skull cap, hopped out of the car adjacent to mine with his own elderly mother. The guy had an unforgettable mean mug, a constant frown. The two headed inside the dollar store. A few minutes later, and my family member finished shopping and came out of the store. We sat in the car for a moment while they looked over their receipt. Right before we pull out of the parking space, the guy exited the store and instantly began staring me down, making direct eye contact despite him not having any way of knowing I was looking at him because of my glasses. I felt creeped out by his expression, which was angry looking. He kept staring at me. So as our car turned to leave the parking lot, I turned my head to stare back at him through the window. I looked in the rearview mirror at him, and I saw him frantically walking out into the middle of the parking lot, flailing his arms and screaming, still making direct eye contact through the rearview mirror. I have never felt more unnerved by the stare of someone like how I felt with this man. His gaze was angry, and his screaming reaction was like he knew who I was, despite never meeting him before. Has anyone else had a strange encounter like this? Freshman year of college, I met this guy. We lived in the same dorm and were part of the same Living Learning Community, LLC, which is a program my university had for freshmen, so they could meet people with similar interests. My particular LLC had an additional class to go along with it. I officially met KG in that class, and we got along well enough. We really only talked when the professor had us discuss in groups, and I didn't see him outside of class much. Every now and then we'd pass each other on campus, and maybe wave or stop for a short chat. Soon, classes started to ramp up. I was an architecture major, and sadly it became common for me to get back to my dorm well after 2 o'clock in the morning. Thankfully, I lived close, and would typically walk back with a friend anyway. Plus, campus was well lit, and my dorm was a straight shot from the architecture building. I felt completely safe, even walking alone. Normally, when I got back, no one would be in the common area, which I had to walk past to get to my room. But it wouldn't be strange for a group, of guys typically, to be hanging out, playing pool, etc. This is where I would most often run into KG during freshman year. He'd wave, and if I was awake and aware enough to notice him, I'd wave back. Sometimes he'd just be coming back too, and would hold the door open for me, and we'd talk for a bit. He seemed nice enough, though I didn't know him that well. We had the same type of humor, and he was easy to talk to. But as a few months went by, things started to pop up. No red flags or anything disturbing, just odd, random. One day I ran into him on my way back from the campus store. We talked for a bit, and he asked if I wanted a chopstick. As he said this, he pulled out a pair of chopsticks, the kind we got from the dining hall. He said they were extra and that he didn't need them. Personally, I find random and semi-chaotic things pretty funny, and the thought of telling my friends how a guy just handed me chopsticks made me laugh. So, I took them. They were still in the packaging, but it was just the Royal Bamboo brand. Thinking back on it, I wouldn't have known if they'd been used or not. I don't remember what I did with them. That interaction struck me as slightly strange, but I brushed it off, thinking he was just being quirky. I had a lot of friends that I could see doing the same thing and just acting random and chaotic to be funny, but only among our friend group, not to a near stranger. Nothing else of note happened freshman year. Sophomore year, sadly, is another story. Early fall semester, I went to the dining hall alone. While I like eating with others, I enjoyed the time to myself to just watch a show or listen to a podcast. After I finished, I happened to pass KG on my out. He was sitting down, also by himself. We got to talking about summer, classes, etc. Somehow we got on the topic of my dress, and I mentioned how I wished it had pockets. He mentioned he knew how to sew. We talked about hobbies for a bit and then I left. A few weeks later, we had almost repeat interaction, except this time we got there at the same time. He was already set with his food, so he followed me around as I got mine, and then I sat down with him. It was a regular conversation, but I got the impression that he wasn't really listening to my responses, instead just preparing what he was going to say next. Often it wouldn't have anything to do with what we were talking about, or it would be sort of random again. For instance, we were talking about work, and he said his coworker told him he was just like Jesus. Interesting. I asked in what way. He said the guy just said some verses from Ephraim, not a book in the Bible, or Ecclesiastes. Okay then. Another example, during the same conversation, he said if I was ever bored, he had an Xbox at his apartment. We no longer lived in the same dorm. That's all well and good, but we weren't talking about anything to do with games or boredom. He was like this throughout the conversation. Anyways, we ended up switching numbers, and the next day I added him on Snapchat. This is where things begin to get weird. Given KG's comments about sewing and Xbox, I got the idea that maybe he liked me, though I wasn't sure how I felt. He added me back on SC, and we had a short conversation about the weather. Out of the blue, he asked if I wanted him to bring me food. Once again, the topic of food or hunger hadn't come up. I was a bit weirded out, but brushed it off. I sent him a picture of the snacks I had in my dorm, saying I was all set. But thank you. We would snap every couple of days. I'd send him pictures of my messy desk and drawings. I don't remember what pictures he sent. Several more times, always out of the blue, he'd ask if he could bring me food, if I wanted him to bring me food, etc. I always said no because I thought it was strange. If he was trying to ask me out, why wouldn't he ask if I wanted to go somewhere and get food with him, or do something together? That approach makes more sense to me, rather than bringing me some unspecified meal. Also, there was the question of, would he stay with me while I ate it? Or would he drop it off and leave? If it was the latter, I knew I'd feel guilty, like I was using him. Not to mention, if he was trying to ask me out, why wouldn't he change up his approach? Especially since I kept turning him down. Finally, there came a time where I mentioned I was cold, and he asked if I wanted him to bring me coffee. I was tempted because coffee sounded pretty nice, and at least I knew what I'd be getting. But then came the questions. Would he pay for it? I didn't want him to because then I'd feel like I owed him something. I was also trying to save money, so I didn't want to buy my own coffee. Plus, it was raining, hence the cold, and I didn't want him to go to the trouble of walking in the storm. To top it off, I didn't really want him in my studio anyway. Architecture classroom. I had already decided I wasn't interested in him like that, but would continue to be semi-friends with him, and I was afraid if I let him buy/bring me food, I'd be leading him on. So I turned him down again. Later, around dinner time, he asked if I liked kiwis. I told him I'd never actually had one before. He asked if I'd like him to bring me one. At this point, I just appreciated that I knew what I'd be getting, and, theoretically, there was no money involved. I said sure. Later that evening, he showed up at my dorm in a black trench coat. This is the first I've seen in person in several months. Every other interaction had been over Snapchat. Right after I let him in, before we even made it to the kitchen, he pulled from the depths of his coat a set of knives. They were pretty shiny, and I admired them. I knew he liked to cook, so it made sense to me that he would have them. Going into the kitchen, we chatted while he pulled out 2 kiwis and washed them, and I sat down at a nearby table.
He came over and gave me the one he had cut in half sitting across from me. As I'm spooning out the fruit, I notice he's just looking at me. I ask if he's going to eat his. "Oh, they're both for you." That confused me a bit. He brought 2 kiwis and was apparently planning on watching me eat both of them. I've never been comfortable in a situation where I'm the only one eating, so I joked/insisted that he eat the other one. I then watched as he grabbed the one in front of him, uncut, and bit into it, skin and all. Apparently you can do that. He proceeded to eat it like an apple, and then hinted that he hadn't had dinner yet. I had, and I had a paper to write. Against my better judgment and wanting to procrastinate, I said I could eat. In my defense, my first dinner sucked. Leaving for the dining hall, he recognized and waved to some people in my common room. I asked how he knew them. He said he was their weed friend last year. Ah. He assured me he hadn't partaken, only sold. Now, I'm not into drugs, and I try to steer of people who do. Nothing against them, but life is easier for me that way. Besides, I have asthma. At dinner, we had another conversation just like the others, with a bunch of sudden topic changes. Leaving, I naturally went to the crosswalk near the dining hall, because I thought this was the end of our hangout. He'd have to cross the sidewalk to go home, and this is where I'd say goodbye. That didn't happen. We were just standing there now, not moving. I asked where he was going. "Oh, I was following you." Okay, and I had brought him to the crosswalk, a pretty big hint that this was over. With no polite way to tell him to go home, we ended up going back to my dorm. His friends weren't there, and with no reason to go into the kitchen, we just walked down the hallway. In no way did I want to bring him to my room, so I made a desperate turn into the vending machine room. We talked a bit in here. He looked at the candy and asked what my favorite was. These machines didn't have my favorite, and I joked that I was broke anyway, so it didn't matter. Again, he offered to buy it for me. This at least had more context and a better reason. Anyway, I thanked him but declined, not wanting to risk leading him on. We talked some more, until eventually I said I had to go write my paper. In response, he laid down on the counter. I laughed so it wouldn't be awkward, and because he was trying to be funny, and then walked him to the door. I couldn't just wave goodbye from inside, because he was standing out there, waiting. I couldn't just stick my head out and wave either, because all the walls and doors are glass, and that'd look pretty weird. So I stepped out. He made this move with his arm. I looked to me like he was going to hug me, and it resulted in a weird side hug moment. He looked at me and asked what that was. I joked I didn't know. He said he wanted to dap me up, so we did that. 3 times. Then he left, disappearing into the night with his black trench coat and knives. I don't see him again, and gradually over winter break our snaps stopped. Now it's February. I'd crossed paths with him a lot more, mainly on the way to the dining hall. We'd usually just wave and smile. Sometimes he'd try and touch me, either with a high five or fist bump to the shoulder. Once I ran into him in the dining hall. He asked me about winter break and if I'd slain all my enemies. That's a bit of the quirkiness I was somewhat used to with my friends, so it didn't seem too weird to me. I ran into him another time, though, and had an almost shot-for-shot conversation, including the slain enemies line. I guess it was his new opener. One day I'm having lunch by myself. I had a good stretch of time to eat and relax before I had to give a presentation. Enjoying my food and my podcast, all of a sudden, my table starts to shake. It was wobbly anyway, so I thought someone bumped into it until I saw something drop to the floor. Rushing to swallow, take out my earbuds and clear the hair from my eyes, I look up and lock eyes with KG. He was sitting, uninvited, at my very small table and was incredibly obnoxious doing it. Granted, maybe that wasn't all his fault, but still. Now I have an angry resting face anyways, and was feeling irritated, so I didn't try too hard to make my face look neutral. I said hello, but his only response was to quickly wag his finger near the side of his mouth for an uncomfortable amount of time. Eventually, seeing that I wasn't getting it, he said I had something on my face. I wipe it away, but nothing was there. He looks confused, then shrugs. Huh. Guess it's dead skin. Just what every girl wants to hear. I just look at him, growing more irritated. He decides to restart this interaction. He tells me he liked my hair. I had cut it, and asks about winter break. Again. Then clarifies that I had a dog. I thanked him for the compliment, said yes, I had a dog, and asked if he wanted to see pictures. He said yes, and as I'm going to pull up pictures, he says he'll show me pictures of the puppy his family put down. Hearing the word puppy, I had begun to awe, but when he said put down, I wasn't sure what to do. It was so out of the blue. I don't think I said anything. When we showed the pictures, he said he was too sad, so he showed me pictures of another dog. Then, what do you think of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ? I thought this was weird wording. Isn't the question, do you know our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ? Anyways, I said I liked him. KG did an exaggerated thinking face, hand stroking the non-existent beard and everything. Are you a Christian? Yep. Do you know what Monday school is? I asked if he meant Sunday school, but he was adamant that these kids he grew up with went to Monday school. I said I had no idea. Maybe it was a different denomination, or just an after-school club. He shrugged, then said, I have a pentagram in my apartment. I nod, taken aback. Weird. Why? It was left by the previous tenant. I'm imaging a big bloody pentagram, like the kind they use in horror movies. So, I jokingly ask if it's drawn in blood. He pauses for a second and his eyes seem to light up. Yes. He then proceeds to go into how much blood, the type of blood, where it came from, etc. I zone out. Somewhere along the way, he points at my food and calls it crap. It was lo mein, thank you very much, and delicious. Now my appetite is gone, and I'm progressively more irritated. In his defense, he did ask several times if I had somewhere to be. I should have taken the out, but since I technically didn't, I said no and stayed. I've since learned my lesson. At some point, I ask how big this pentagram is. He holds up his hand, making a circle shape. So, smaller than a fist. That's a little underwhelming. He jokes that the person who drew was too lazy to finish, saying they didn't even draw the circle. That's a star. If there's no circle, it's just a regular star. We come to a lull in the conversation. He looks around, spots the napkin holder, and asks if I need one. I shake my head. No thanks, I'm all good. He shrugs, okay. Grabbing a napkin, he folds it, tears off the corner, and eats it. I'm in shock. We're just staring at each other, one person traumatized, the other eating a napkin. With no idea what to do, I tell him to swallow it. If he's making me experience this insanity, then he's going to swallow that napkin. Unfortunately, I don't think he does. How does it taste? I ask. He makes a face. Gross. Well, I said, glancing at the holder. It is recycled. The holder proudly said the napkins were made from recycled paper. Oh. His face lights up. That means I could be eating a tampon. I don't laugh, and I guess seeing I don't find it funny, he grabs the rest of the napkin, thankfully doesn't eat it, but starts folding it up. I ask what he's doing. He says he's making a joint. Another joke? He then tells me about having to be careful and hiding drugs from the police, and about this crazy drug trip he went on when he hid drugs up his butt. Honestly, this last part is all a blur. I know the story involved butt drugs, kindergartners, and demons. I looked at my phone and said I had to go, and that this was a very wide-ranging conversation. He agreed and said, until we meet again. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see him watching me as I left. Nothing really strange, I guess, but I noticed. That's the last conversation I had with him. I stopped eating lunch and switched to breakfast, wanting to avoid the possibility of seeing him one-on-one again. That also resulted in me crossing paths with him less on campus. My RD recommended I fill out a student concern report because she thought maybe he was acting out in response to his puppy's death. Maybe. I'm not sure what to think. I'm going to end this story with the disclaimer that I'm not trying to be mean. I understand that people struggle with social anxiety in social situations, and that there are mental disabilities/disorders/illnesses that could result in someone acting in ways others could find strange. I don't know for certain if he struggled with anything like that, but I would never cut off a friendship or even an acquaintanceship for those reasons alone. I did enjoy talking to him and brushed off behaviors that stuck out to me because they were harmless, namely referring to the abrupt changes in topic and the repeated offering to bring me food. In his defense, I didn't have to agree to the Kiwis, to get dinner that one time, or to stay in that last conversation as long as I did. That said, it wasn't until the last interaction that I felt any need to distance myself, and I did so immediately. Let me know what you think, and maybe what you would have done in my shoes.
I used to do DoorDash on the side, just for some extra cash. Nothing too crazy, until a few months ago when something happened that I still can't stop thinking about. And to be honest, I haven't done a single delivery since. It was around 11 p.m. and I was finishing up my last order for the night. The delivery was in a quiet, upscale LA neighborhood. Nothing out of the ordinary. I pull up, leaving the car running like I always do. Grab the food and drop it off. Super normal. No weird vibes from the customer or anything. But as I walk back to my car, something feels off. I can't explain it, but the air felt heavier, like I could sense something was wrong before I even got to the door. I get in the driver's seat, close the door, and glance in the rearview mirror. That's when I see him. There's a guy sitting in my back seat. Just sitting there, hoodie pulled low over his face, completely still. My heart stopped. I was frozen, staring at him through the mirror, trying to figure out how the heck he got in my car. I managed to stammer out, "Can I help you?" And that's when he leans forward, just a little, and I can finally see his eyes. They were wide and bloodshot, like he hadn't slept in days. He leans back again, and in the calmest voice just says, "Drive." I don't know why, but I did. I started driving, my mind racing, trying to figure out what to do. He didn't say anything else, just sat there, completely calm, while I drove through these dark streets. And I'm just freaking out inside, thinking this is it. This is how I'm going to get robbed, or worse. Then he tells me to turn down a side street. It's dark, barely any streetlights, and I'm just thinking, this is where it's going to go down. But right as we approach a gas station, well lit, a few people around, I slam on the brakes, throw the car in park, and jump out, screaming for help. The gas station clerk runs out, and I'm yelling that there's a guy in my back seat. But when we go back to the car, it's empty. The guy was gone. No sign of him anywhere. He just vanished. I have no idea how he got out so fast or where he went, but I didn't care. I got back in my car, locked the doors, and drove straight home. I've replayed that night over and over in my head, and it still doesn't make any sense. That was months ago, and I haven't touched the DoorDash app since. I don't know if I ever will. It's not worth risking something like that happening again. Recently, I, a 27-year-old female, was out doing some errands when my girlfriend asked if I could pick her up some cigarettes. Simple enough. I decided to stop at a gas station I've been to a time or two before, and walk in and go straight to the counter. I waited for the employee to finish with the person in front of me when a random man cut right in front of me, right as the previous person was finished. I thought whatever, I'm very non-confrontational, and just shrugged it off at no big deal. The employee then proceeded to tell the man that he cut in front of me and that I was next while motioning for me to come forward. The guy then grunted and moved to behind me. I quietly thanked the gas station employee and recognized him from a previous gas station stop. He started talking to me, asking how my day was and what I was doing, and was noticeably more talkative than the previous time. He then started to talk about how cute I looked today, and started commenting about the shorts I was wearing, and I could start to feel the knot in my stomach. I began panicking and quickly trying to get my payment ready, when the employee continued commenting about the length of my shorts, saying, "Those are the shortest I've ever seen." And it's like you're trying to get me turned on. I was absolutely frozen and could only muster a slight uncomfortable chuckle and looked up to see his face. That's when I noticed that he was barely looking at me, but almost staring through me or behind me. I also then remembered that there was another customer behind me and couldn't believe the employee was telling me this with others around. I swiped my card, grabbed the cigarettes, and slowly backed out while the machine processed the payment. As I was backing out, I could hear him continue to say something about wanting me to come back to visit him. But by that point, I was already halfway out the door. Why would an employee tell this to someone, and with someone else right behind me? The whole thing has left me feeling completely creeped out and fearful of gas stations. To make a long story short, there was this man who looked to be in his 30s staring me down at the train station on my way home from school a couple of weeks ago. Initially, I, a 17-year-old female, had been waiting near the station exit because it was absolutely pouring the rain down outside, and I didn't have an umbrella on hand. I ended up waiting for a while after the rain had stopped because that man, who had waited near me for what I presumed to be the same reason, had been staring at me the entire time. I hoped he'd leave before me, but seeing as he didn't, I eventually brushed it off and left the station. Of course, because I wouldn't be writing this if I hadn't, the man followed me. He practically chased me down and managed to catch up to me at a red light. At this point, I was alarmed because the route I have to take to reach my house is actually vacant and quite obscured, and just generally not a safe area to go through alone. Immediately, he started to talk to me, offering to take me to lunch and buy me things. I was polite but very clearly dismissive, and while he talked to me, I quickly decided to turn in the opposite direction to reach one of the main streets where there'd likely be more people, so that I wouldn't have to be alone with him any longer. He followed me there too, and kept insisting on buying me an umbrella, even though it had stopped raining. I politely declined and was walking faster with every moment that passed, but he just seemed to get frustrated and followed me the whole time up until I reached a store. He didn't stop there, of course. He walked into the store with me, and the cashier seemed oblivious to how uncomfortable I was. I tried to distance myself by going through one of the aisles, which was quite narrow, and the guy took that as an opportunity to grab me by the waist and run his hands down my lower back, and I just froze. At that point, I felt defeated and decided to play along, so I told him I'd write down his number at the exit, and he seemed happy with that. He kept touching me, and I feel disgusted just at the memory of it. I'm not even sure how many times he had his hands around me in the span of a few minutes. He'd hugged me at some point and grabbed me by the hands and wrists, and I just barely dodged a kiss. Luckily, I seemed convincing enough, and he didn't follow me all the way to my house like he was insisting on. I didn't see him again for a week, so I started to let my guard down. But as of a few days ago, I keep finding him sat in the front of the train station at the time that I come back from school. I've seen him 4 days in a row now, and although it's probably a coincidence and I shouldn't think much of it, it's a really unpleasant reminder. Every time I see him, he's sitting on a bench on the street that I have to cross, and he just stares at me. It is beyond creepy. I'm a 19-year-old female, and at the time of this story, I worked at a resort. We closed at 10 p.m., and the bus showed up at 10:20 p.m. I'm taking my usual route, and I have my headphones on. Usually when I do, I'm paying attention to shadows, sounds, and looking behind me. One ear is always out. At the point, I'm walking up to my bus stop that's on the right side of the sidewalk, and right across on the left side there's this doorway entrance, but it created a little nook, if you know what I mean. I always waited in that nook. This time I decide to stand by the road right next to the actual bus stop. Maybe a minute later I turn around and there's this man in the doorway nook. I ignore it but position myself so I can see him through my side view. A few seconds later he walks up and asks me if I'm taking the bus. Didn't think much of it because I've had that happen a lot, so I reply with a yes. He says nothing for a few seconds and then says, "I'll be waiting over here." Giggles, then backs up into the nook. A few minutes go by, and he walked up to the bench which my back is facing, so I reposition myself again, and in the corner of my eyes I can see him unzip his bag and slide a pocket knife up his sleeve and walk back to the nook. At this point, I decided to move in front of the bus stop. It's the ones you see with the cover you'll see on the side of the road. You know what I'm talking about. I'm along the curb, so my back's facing everything but him. He then sees that, walks past me and tried to go to the actual bus stop and walk right up behind me. As he's walking behind me, maybe 4 feet away, I turn around and stare at him. He pauses, smiles, backs up and walks around and goes back into the nook. The bus shows up. I should have caught the next one, but he insists I go ahead of him. I get in, and he follows me to the back of the bus. Again, I should have sat up front, and sits in the row right next to me. We would have been shoulder to shoulder if the aisle wasn't there. I was texting my boyfriend the entire time, so he's already at the bus stop waiting for me. The man followed me to my town, gets off with me, walks with me to the end of the sidewalk, and once he saw my boyfriend, turned right around, and he started waiting for the next bus. Hi, so, as the title says, I'm 21. Not sure if gender matters, but I am female. Now this might sound maybe a tad bit overdramatic since it's been years since this incident has happened that caused this fear, but I just want to get it off my chest as someone who doesn't really talk about it. I personally find this encounter super creepy, especially getting older and being able to look back on it. I've learned a lot from it, so maybe posting what happened could either guide others to stay alert that it could happen to them or know the signs. I live in rural Ohio, so there's not much that goes on here. We don't live in the best area either, with lots of druggies and pedos. Just, if you have kids, you really shouldn't live around here, basically. When I was younger, we didn't really worry much about anything happening to us, or questionable things due to the fact our family is known in this area. My grandpa was a known cop for many years and was extremely respected, and people knew he would fight over us. So nobody really messed with us. We also lived around multiple other children our age. It wasn't uncommon to let your kids run around by themselves before nighttime, because our neighborhood essentially relied on each other and the other kids to keep each other safe. And it worked for the most part. We knew what people to stay away from, and they knew to stay away from us as well. When I was in middle school, the bus ran at 7 a.m., and we would have to be at the end of our long driveway by 7 a.m. to catch the bus on time. And this happened during winter, and our bus tended to be late sometimes, and would reach us around 7:05 to 7:15 the latest. But we made sure to be out at 7 a.m. in case they were on time. It was me and my 2 cousins. One was 4 years younger than me, and the other was a year older, but we were in the same grade. The road is straight where our driveway is, so cars come by multiple times, and you would be able to see if a car was slowing down and such, and they'd see us as well. We were always told to not stand by the end of the driveway, and always keep a distance,
so if a drunk driver or whatever happened to swerve, we would be okay for the most part. We were at the age where me and my cousin, who was in the same grade as me, essentially babysat the younger cousin, and we didn't have an adult accompany us at the end of the driveway anymore. It was super cold that day, and the sun was just coming up, and we were annoyed because the bus was late while waiting in the cold. I noticed a car was coming, and again, this happened all the time, so it wasn't like I was checking it out or anything. I just noticed it, and went back to listening to music on my phone. I hear a loud brake sound, so I look up, and the car is in front of our driveway now fully stopped. The man in the car was waving his hand towards us to signal us to come closer to him, and of course, I refused, and was frozen in my spot because this never happened before. He could tell we were obviously shaken back by this, and said he worked for a school but was lost, and he just got hired. He named a school that was an hour away. Remind you, it's past 7 a.m. at this point, and I immediately knew he was lying. It didn't make sense to me why he would be lost at a job he said he already got. Plus it being this late, I'd think he would already be at the school. No way would he be lost to the point he's an hour away from the district. And signaling children to his car, the way he did if he was a teacher at all. It also made no sense to me logically how he would be lost from a job he obviously had to go in to get hired for. This was before Zoom and all those things, I'm pretty sure. I immediately said I'm going to get an adult, and he clearly panicked and said it wasn't necessary, that he just wanted us to get closer and show him where to go. I pointed straight. I truly don't know the direction to the district, but that was not my main focus, honestly. I told him to go straight and he ignored me. My little cousin was moving towards his car, and I grabbed him by his hair and kept him by me. I refused to let go of his head. I'm shaking and I'm trying to not show I'm scared because I don't know what's about to happen. The driveway is a long one as well. Like I truly didn't feel safe turning my back on him. I have my other hand on my phone and I'm shaking, so I'm struggling with gloves on, but I'm able to call my mom, and thank God she answers. She usually would ignore my calls and be on the phone with her boyfriend. The guy gets out of his car when he sees I'm on the phone with someone, and I start immediately sobbing and telling my mom there's a man out here, and I think he's going to hurt us. She comes out running, and the second she gets closer and he sees her, he bolts back to his car and dashes away. A car that was around the corner of the road also dashed away as well. Now looking back is even more scary, since if it was just someone who needed to get past said car that was in the middle of the road by our driveway, they would have just either honked or gone on the other lane to pass them. They definitely also saw the entire thing and didn't get out of their car to help us or anything. So it makes me think they were also in on this entire situation. I'm forced to go to school that day, and my mom calls the cops. And when I get home, I find out even more horrible news that just made me realize my gut feeling was correct. My mom told them the car and how it looked and such, and they found an abandoned car that matched her description just up the road, so they found who it belonged to and eventually found out he wasn't a school teacher. He worked on the barges. The cops said they thought it dealt with sex trafficking from the looks of it, and they didn't even catch him since they already left on the boat or whatever. Who knows what would have happened if he got one of us? I'm assuming we would have been on that boat and horrible things would have happened. It's truly terrifying, and to this day I refuse to go near the road. I still have recurring nightmares of it. I'm always on alert now too, which I most definitely should have been more alert back then, but I was just a kid and clearly didn't realize how it would have affected me in real time. I'm a 29-year-old man from the Philippines, and even though this incident occurred back in 2013, over a decade ago, I still find myself haunted by it every time I return to my hometown. At the time, I was just an 18-year-old college student. It was the night of our department's socialization party, which had wrapped up around midnight. As the only one among my friends with a car, I had always taken on the role of the designated driver. After dropping my friends off at their homes, I was parking in my usual spot, just a few houses away from my own, due to the limited parking in our area. As I was about to exit the car, I noticed a girl standing near the entrance of the alleyway leading to my house, and several others wearing a shirt with our department's logo. I assumed she had just walked back from the party. In front of her, a man in his late 20s, clad in a hoodie, stood ominously, seemingly blocking her path. The girl locked eyes with me, and I immediately recognized her expression. It was a silent plea for help. Instinct kicked in. I grabbed my bag and stepped out of the car. The man, noticing my presence, began to walk into the alleyway. When I reached the girl, he had vanished from sight. It felt as though whatever threatening situation had occurred moments before was over, and I was tempted to walk away. But then I caught sight of the strange man again. He was leaning against the wall of a nearby house, his gaze fixed on me. A chill ran down my spine, and just then the girl called out from behind me. Her voice trembled with fear, and I saw her approach, visibly shaken. "Can you walk with me to my apartment at the end of the alleyway?" she asked, explaining that the man had been silently blocking her way. I glanced back at the man. He appeared intoxicated, perhaps drunk or on drugs. We began to walk, our breaths shallow as we passed by him. After putting some distance between us, I glanced back. To my horror, he was following us. We had already passed my house at that point, but I couldn't leave this girl to face him alone. As fear coursed through me, she suddenly broke into a full sprint, and I had no choice but to keep pace with her. We reached the gate to her apartment, and she hastily swung it open, slamming it shut behind us. We then dashed into the building, where a second gate stood, this one smaller, likely designed to keep pets from escaping. She opened it, and we slipped through just as the sound of the man approaching the first gate reached our ears. We bolted up the stairs, making our way to the third floor. Breathless, the girl knocked urgently but softly at her apartment door. After what felt like an eternity, it swung open, revealing her friends, a guy and a girl around her age. They looked bewildered but quickly locked the door behind us and led us into the bedroom. They turned off the lights, and we just sat there silently with our hearts pounding. The girl broke down in tears, recounting the terrifying events to her friends. She revealed that the man had been following her for 10 to 15 minutes, and she expressed relief at having seen me. Unsure of what to do next, I called my aunt, who was staying at our house that night. Thankfully, she answered swiftly. I urged her to call the police. At this time, we could now hear the man pacing around the apartment, seemingly looking for us. He was mumbling something we couldn't hear well from the other side of the door. A few minutes later, my phone rang with an unknown number. It was my uncle, a policeman, reassuring me that help was on the way. What felt like hours dragged on, and eventually the police arrived. My uncle instructed me via phone to come downstairs and recount the ordeal to the officers. They informed us that they had seen the man wandering around the gate and eventually into the far end of the alleyway. Once the police had finished their inquiries, they allowed me to go home. I recounted the entire story to my aunt, who urged me to get some rest. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me as my mind raced with thoughts of the strange man. What if he had caught up with us, armed with a knife or some weapon? I fought to dispel the terrifying images racing through my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he might be watching me in the dark, a knife glinting menacingly in his hand.
So I'm new to this city for a concert I'm going to see. It's my first time traveling alone, so I feel like the safest spot for me is to just relax and read some manga in the city library, while I wait for my hotel check-in time to come. Well, I guess I picked a bad spot to read at, because people kept trying to talk with me, which is fine, but I'm too shy to just tell them to go away. One person sat at a table across from me, and asked me where I'm from and who I came with. Obviously, I lied, even though I assumed this person was an older lady. They were wearing a hat and thick coat, so I couldn't really tell. I was nicer to them than I should have been, since I assumed this older lady was the chatty type. She says I look young and have nice hair and stuff, and asks if I'm from around here and where my parents are. I'm an adult. Well, turns out they're not a lady, as I got a closer look at them as he came closer and he comes to sit next to me. He asks for my number, and stupidly I did give him my actual phone number. He wrote his down and his name, and asked me to write my name too. I put a fake name. Then he gives me his phone to put in the info, and compares the written to what I put on his phone. Real number, fake name. I can't bring myself to refuse since none of the librarians were looking our way, and he was very big, so I didn't want to make him mad or something. Then he turns to leave and asks what he can call me, and I'm just like, oh, just whenever, haha. Obviously, I blocked him when he tried to call later, so I hope that he assumes my number was fake too. But as he left, he asked if I had Facebook, and I said no. And then he asks to take a photo of me. He's like, can I take some pictures of you if you don't have a Facebook? And I nervously laugh, like, no. Honestly, what was he even thinking? Anyway, I don't think I'll visit a big city library ever again. I'll just go to Barnes & Noble next time. I was walking the 4 blocks to the JCC by my house and meeting my 2 best friends who were sisters, D and B. I was walking and feeling relaxed because I'd walked to the J a million times before. I started walking past a small empty office building, and that's when I noticed a dark car idling way in the back. The car had tinted windows, and the driver rolled down his window and said I was very beautiful and asked if I'd modeled. He had sunglasses and a baseball cap on. He also had a salt and pepper red beard. He looked like he was in his 30s or 40s. I said yes, and he asked if I could take my pictures. I stupidly told him my plans to meet B and D. He said he could tell that I'd modeled. I was getting more creeped out. He continued to talk to me and took a couple of photos. As he continued to talk to me, I got a bad feeling. My heart dropped into my stomach. I remembered what my parents said about not talking to strangers, and all of my alarm bells were going off. He slightly moved his car and it terrified me. He asked me to come over so he could get better pictures. Suddenly, it was like I was hyper aware of everything. I told him I had to meet my mom, which was different from what I told him earlier, but I didn't even think of that because I was so terrified. He kept trying to get me closer to his car. I saw a woman watering her lawn, and I said she was my mom, and I broke off in a sprint all the way home. I was shaking and crying by the time I got home. I told my mom and she took me to the police station. To my shock, D and B were there too. He'd gone to the JCC where I said I was meeting them. He just took their pictures, which they thought was funny. We did a police sketch and found out there was another girl he'd taken pictures of and tried to take her. They never caught him, and it also scares me thinking about this guy, and who knows what else on the loose. To start, I'm a 17-year-old female, and I am in the 12th grade. I already have somewhat of a fear of older men / men in general due to my own experiences. Another thing is that I have a really intense anxiety, so it makes it hard for me to make my discomfort known. I had this math teacher back in my 11th grade year who really creeped me out as he would get really close to me, like I could smell his breath close. He would touch my shoulder or shake me as a joke, which put me off. But I shoved the feeling down as I thought my fear was clouding my judgment. Well, until this year. This year, I had class that required me to walk past his room to get to my first period. Normally, I would just not make eye contact to not start a conversation. It worked for a while, until one day I was walking past, but was stopped by him. He grabbed me by my shoulder and wouldn't let me go until I smiled at him. I did smile at him, and after that he let me go, and I quickly ran towards my first period. Now I avoid that hallway entirely, despite me having to walk up and down stairs to avoid him. Turns out, other female students also found her very creepy, after I told my friends that I found him creepy as well. This story happened around 3 years ago, around the time that COVID started, so it was a while back, but still worthy of a post. It was early 2020, and I had just gotten a new job in a small town near my area. While looking for a place to live, my sister offered to rent her house to me. She had bought the house 2 years prior, but she and her husband didn't really take to it, and their commute to work was long, so they moved out and the house was uninhabited. Luckily for me, it was actually pretty close to my workplace, only around a 40-minute drive, and my sister pretty much rented it to me for free. I just paid for the water and electricity and looked after the house. I was living there for a solid 2 or 3 months and had already gotten used to it. One night, after coming back from work and parking my car, as I walked towards my door, I noticed something odd. There was a cigarette butt on the curb to my house. I leaned down and picked it up, thinking that it might have been mine since I'm a smoker. But after looking at the brand name, I realized that it wasn't mine and threw it away. I didn't think much of it, and just shrugged it off as some butthole throwing it on my curb. I went on my night, and nothing unusual happened. 2 days later, I was once again walking to my house when I spotted a few more cigarette butts, this time near my porch. Needless to say, I was angry and thought that someone sat on my porch and smoked, but since I didn't know who it was, there was nothing I could do about it. I noticed that they were put out pretty recently, so whoever it was probably walked off as I was approaching. That night, I was watching a movie on my laptop, and it was pretty late, past 1 a.m., so I was surprised when I heard a car passing by. It's a suburban neighborhood, and it was COVID, so people rarely ventured out at night, but I didn't think much of it. Around half an hour later, I was surprised when I heard chattering nearby. I listened intently, but I couldn't hear what they were talking about, as their voices seemed almost muffled and quiet. By this point, I was getting a bit unnerved, so I stopped the movie and quietly got off of my sofa and walked to the front door to make sure that it was locked. As I was approaching the door, I froze mid-step as I heard the two approaching my porch and reducing their talking to a whisper. I realized right away that whoever this was wanted to break in. I leaned against my front door and waited, expecting a loud bang against the door or the doorknob being shaken, but it was oddly quiet. I decided to walk over to my window to see if they had walked away or changed their mind. My windows have bars from the inside out that you have to unlock, so that you could move the curtains or look out the window comfortably. I slowly unlocked the bar mechanism and lifted it up. I moved the curtains and was taken aback. Leaning up against my window was a man. He was as startled as I was, because he basically stuttered over his own steps as he jumped back. He tightened his hoodie to cover his face, so all I could really see was his big blue eyes staring at me. His friend realized what was going on, and right away started to kick the door in. He kicked it a solid 4 or 5 times, but the door wouldn't budge. All the while, I was staring at them frozen in fear, trying to comprehend the situation. I snapped out of it and slammed the bars over my window, locking them and running upstairs to the storage room, where I pushed a table up to the door and called the cops. As I listened and expected the two to come inside at any minute, I heard a loud crash and the bars from the windows being shaken aggressively. When they realized that they couldn't get in, one of them let out a long, angry scream that probably woke up half the neighborhood. By the time the cops came, they were long gone. The police couldn't find out who it was,
but they were more active in the neighborhood in the following weeks. Regardless, I wasn't too keen on staying there, so shortly after I moved out. My sister sold the house a few months later, and as far as I know, nothing similar ever happened since. So I took my dog out on a walk yesterday. It was overcast but daytime, and we hadn't been out long. We were still close to home. My dog was sniffing away at a patch of grass, and I'm watching him and sort of just daydreaming, waiting for him to be done. Really quickly, out of nowhere, he jumps up and spins around, facing the path behind us. I thought that he'd spotted another dog, but no. I turn around and there's a man, sort of crouched down low, doing a really over-exaggerated sneak towards us. It honestly looked like something out of a cartoon. I was just stunned, and my dog was standing there with all of his fur puffed up. Didn't have a chance to say, "Hey, what are you doing?" or anything, because as soon as we caught him sneaking towards us, he turned around and ran off. If this had happened on one of our night walks, or early morning ones when it's dark, I think I would have had a heart attack. It was freaky enough during the day and close to home. I'm not really sure what he would have done if he'd managed to sneak right up to us, or why he thought that he'd even be able to. My dog is a German Shepherd, so I usually feel quite safe while walking him. I'm not sure if this belongs or not, so if not, just let me know. When I, a 31-year-old female, was 16, I was in a choir at my high school that performed for a lot of different events around town. One of them was to sing at the middle school's sporting events. The middle school in my hometown, there's only one, is just about a half a mile from my local childhood home. So whenever we had events there, I walked. I didn't get my license until I was 17. This one night, I think it was November, we had to sing at a basketball game, and it was obviously dark when I was able to leave. Normally, I wasn't allowed to walk alone at night, but for choir, I was given permission unless I felt unsafe. But there wasn't any reason to be creeped out at first, so I started my walk. Just down from the middle school is a stretch of road with almost no street lights. That has always creeped me out when walking. I crossed quickly and had a fast pace going, as I am a naturally paranoid human. About 2 minutes into the dark zone, I heard rapid footsteps behind me. I at first figured that it was just a jogger, but they made no attempt to pass me and just stayed a comfortable, for them, 10-foot distance. They began whistling a jaunty tune, which at first I thought was fun. At this point, I wasn't super scared, perhaps because of the happy whistling tune, but I noticed the footsteps began to speed up. There were no cars on the road, and given the lack of light, when I turned around, all I could see was a silhouette shrouded in darkness. At that realization, I quickened my pace to barely under a run. The whistling continued, getting more breathless as this person began to run after me. I looked back to see a dark figure coming at me full speed, and in terror began to run frantically as well. I will never forget those last moments, running through my dark subdivision, hearing his whistling, and footsteps getting closer and closer. This person followed me up to my door. I ran inside and locked the front, checked all other doors, and went to my upstairs bedroom. From the window, I could still see a silhouette and could still hear them whistling. I slept with my knife that night.
This seems like the right place to tell this story. It happened back in 2013. It was about 8 or 9 o'clock, and I was on my way home from a pal's. I was sat upstairs at the back of the bus. There was only me and one other person on the top floor of the bus, and he was sat near the front on the opposite side. When I got up to get off the bus and walked from the back towards the stairs, he called me. I don't remember exactly how he asked, but he was asking for a lighter. I walked up to him going through my pockets and told him that I had matches and handed them to him. He took them from me and just stared at them for a good few seconds, and then handed them back to me and said something along the lines of, "Don't worry about it." The time it took him to decide not to use them felt very strange, and the eye contact before and after just felt intense. I got walked down the stairs thinking, what the heck was up with that? And I got off the bus. I told a couple of people how weird it felt and described what he was wearing: a zip-up black hoodie with a knockoff party-style tiger on the chest. Fast forward about a week, and there's a fatal stabbing on a bus in my city. A young girl on her way to school was stabbed to death on the top deck of a bus. Stabbings are pretty common in my city, but a young girl being killed on her way to school, that's big news anywhere. They show a photo of the suspect being arrested, but you can only see the back of his hoodie. Straight away, I think that's the exact same Ed Hardy knockoff, and was just wondering if it was the guy that I had seen. When they released more photos of him from the front, I knew that it was him. The scary thing is, it transpired, and he had recently been let out of a mental health facility. He hadn't been given any support and had been sleeping rough on buses. I've had many interactions with mentally ill people and dangerous individuals, but this is one that stays with me. Even though the interaction was much, it felt so strange. I always wonder if he was seeing how I reacted when he asked me, hence why he didn't use the matches. Who knows? It's just a sad story, really. Rest in peace to the poor girl who was unalive. Her name was Christina Edkins. She was only 16 years old. This happened over a decade ago. My ex and I decided to hitchhike across California because we were bored and homeless and had nothing better to do. We stopped in a small town and found a little stream underneath a bridge. My feet were hurting really bad, so I took my shoes off to cool them in the water. And that's when I noticed movement in the bushes to my left. A strange man walked out staring at me. He made a movement with his finger, as if he wanted me to go into the bushes with him. I froze, and I yelled for my ex who was on the bridge waiting for me. He came running, but the man was already gone. It was insanely creepy, but I'm used to weird things happening to me, because I look much younger than my actual age. I know that he must have thought that I was a child. It's unnerving to think that someone could be comfortable enough to do that in the daytime. And that is why I never go exploring by myself. I live in an apartment building, and I guess there was a girl with a name similar to mine with long brown hair who moved in, and she was going on dates at her apartment through the internet. He thought that I was her, and he followed me into my apartment. He said he went down to look at the register in the lobby and saw my name. Yes, we have first and last names posted for deliveries, and our names were really similar, i.e. like Kristen and Christine, or Brianna and Brianne. Anyway, he followed me like I said, and then looked down at the registry downstairs and just assumed that I was this woman. So he knocks on my door. I answer it and he tells me that it's his birthday.
Now keep in mind, I have no idea about any of this. And so I say, "Oh, okay, happy birthday." So then he says that he would give me $60 to go and hang out with him and his friends, and that if I wanted to, quote unquote, party, he would supply it for me. And that he and his friends would pay me for anything, quote unquote, extra. I was completely confused. I said, "What do you mean? What are you talking about? I don't want to go to your birthday party. I don't even know you." To which he replied, "Well, I saw your ad on the internet and replied, and you gave me this address. And I saw you and blah, blah, blah." He tells me the story like I described in the beginning of this post. I said, "No, that's not me. I am not that type of person." Seriously, so strange and creepy. Edit. To be honest, I was still somewhat perplexed until I told a neighbor a few months later. And apparently this woman got booted from the building because of the traffic to her apartment. I'm glad that the management didn't get us confused, as we live on different floors. The complaints of traffic were specific to her apartment. Thank goodness. Did I overreact? Or was this actually super dangerous? A few days ago, I went out for a smoke in the park with my bike. It was already 10 p.m. on a Thursday, and I was looking for a spot to light up my joint. Near the park is a playground, and it's a less populated area of the park, especially at night. Most likely because there are no lights in that spot. So I go there with my bike, get off my bike, and stop there to light up my joint. At that moment, I only hear steps approaching me. I turn back and I see a person, probably male, 6 foot tall, walking towards me. It was dark, and I couldn't see a face or what exactly he wore. I also looked only for an instant and rushed away with my e-bike. Now here is the chilling and confusing part. That person didn't use the road. He walked through the playground towards me. The playground had gravel stones. That was the only reason that I was able to notice that person walking towards me. I also noticed him when he was just about 10 feet away from me. So I wonder why he didn't accelerate when he was so near me. He didn't make any other noise, like saying good evening or laughing at me. When I rushed away, I thought about turning back with my lights on to see who that person was. And I was too afraid. I'm still wondering why someone is alone in the dark on a playground, walking towards me, a stranger, not using the road, and not saying anything. So a bit of a backstory first. Me and some friends knew this guy over the summer because one of my friends was cheating on her boyfriend with him. He knew, so there wasn't like any animosity between him and us. But the guy was always a creep. For example, I have scars on my arm. Not bad at all. You have to look really close to see them. But this guy was looking close. Like I could feel his stare burning a hole through my arm kind of close. He was also very touchy with my underage friends. I kind of freaked out and made sure that none of my friends went around this guy. So flash forward to now. I'm in a store, 6:32 p.m., and it's nighttime. I'm buying fresh scooped ice cream for me and my mom, and I'm about to walk home. Then this guy walks in and says, "Hey," with the most blank, creepy voice ever. And you know when you see into someone's eyes and there's nothing? Like I mean nothing in their eyes? Yeah, that was this guy. Like I mean mega, seriously, uncanny valley. So I'm starting to ignore it. That's when bro is like, What's you gonna do? I'm in a store. So I walk out with my ice cream. I take the back worker entrance because my mom works there. It wasn't her shift. And this guy follows me. Like, I don't know why he would. My hair was a mess and I was wearing sweatpants and a hoodie with chocolate stains on it. So I keep walking fast, and this dude is still following me. So I make it to the bend of my road. Now he does too. I'm halfway down, and a car has to pass through. So he watches me go home from the edge of my road. What a creep. And my mom's response? I'm sorry that happened. And she went back to watching TV. Now I have to walk to the bus stop. But I'm super scared because it's dark out. There's an abandoned house that you can get into on the way. You could hide in there. And I know this dude has a crap ton of time on his hands to do something like this. I'm only 16. I just want to be on time to first period so that I don't get a detention. As I was walking home from work last night, about halfway to my house, a disheveled man who looked to be either homeless or extremely down on his luck crossed paths with me from the other side of the sidewalk. He had initially been walking in the opposite direction, but as soon as he saw me, he immediately turned around and started following me. He began rambling incoherently and aggressively, and his words were so slurred that I hardly understood a thing that he said. All I could make out was something about a care package, and look at you. It was obvious that this man was under the influence of multiple substances. I quickened my pace and tried to avoid any eye contact with the man, and he was getting agitated that I wasn't paying attention to him. When my walking speed got too quick for his inebriated stumbling to keep up with, he stopped talking and instead began just trying to follow me. I kept looking over my shoulder at him, and every time I saw him, he would either stop or try to duck behind a bush. Finally, I started outright sprinting and looking for a spot that I could hide in myself. I came up to my local mosque and tried to sneak around the corner into the parking lot of it, where there was a tree that I had hid behind. While hiding there, I frantically dialed 911. I told them that a strange man displaying unstable behavior was trying to follow me, and described my location, myself, and the man to them. The dispatcher assured me that officers were on their way to where I was, but while waiting for them, I saw a figure heading up the sidewalk in front of the parking lot that I was hiding in. Panic immediately filled me, until the passerby was close enough that I could see that it was not the same man who had just bothered me, and they turned out to be harmless. Mere moments after this, the cops arrived to where I was, pulled up next to the tree, and motioned for me to come out and talk to them. The officer driving the vehicle asked me the standard questions, a description of the incident, where I was when it happened, etc. While we were talking, he spotted a man in another parking lot down the street, not far from where I had encountered the creep. He asked me if that was the man that I had encountered, and it was hard to tell between the darkness and the distance, but I was pretty sure that it was. Another police vehicle had pulled into that parking lot, and it appeared that the officer got out to talk to the man. The officer that I had been talking to asked me how far I was away from my house, and I told him that I was pretty close to my street at this point. He assured me that I should be safe to walk the rest of the way home, and that they had other cops patrolling the area. I thanked him and finished walking home without further incident, thank God. Shortly after I got home, I saw that I had a text from my boyfriend that read, "Are you okay?" The text had been sent at around the same time the incident was occurring, as if he could sense that I was in a fearful situation. I replied back, telling him what had happened. He told me that he had gotten yelled at by a homeless man earlier too. I described the creep that I encountered to him and asked him if he thought that it was the same guy. He said he didn't think so. We also had a brief phone call to make sure that each other was okay. I let him know that I was home safe. and he told me that he was in a vehicle with a group, so he was safe too. I don't know what the cops ended up doing about the man, but I hope that he stays as far away from me as possible. This happened 7.5 years ago, June 23rd, 2016, while I was out cleaning my house. I was renting a house for a year, and the year was almost up. I wasn't going to be living there the next year, so it was time for me to start cleaning out and moving my stuff to my next place. The house that I had at the time was fairly small, but it was plenty of space for just me. I lived there by myself, and I had just finished cleaning out the living room, other than some basic furniture, and I had moved on to clean the kitchen. There were quite a few cabinets, so many that I didn't use a good number of them. I was looking through some of the ones that I didn't use to make sure that there was nothing I had in them. One of them I opened up and I saw something in the back corner. It looked like some type of shirt or rag. I grabbed it and saw that I didn't think that it was mine. But when I moved it, it revealed a small white lever that I could barely see. The cabinet was in the corner, sorted by the sink, and halfway blocked by the stove. I thought that it was just another pipe, but it just looked a little different to me. I got inside and had to crawl inside the cabinet, which was pretty large. Once I got inside, I saw that there was a small trap door to the side leading into the wall. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. You had to be completely inside in order to see the detail of it. And I decided to open the door, which led to an extremely narrow hallway with a sort of crawl space. But when I got farther inside, I was horrified. I saw that there was food, as well as several blankets, as if someone had been living inside of there. The good news, at least to me, is that whoever was in there was gone. I tried to make sense of it and figure out how long the person had been there, and how I didn't know about it. I was gone from the house a lot with work and other stuff, but I didn't know how it was possible for someone to live in there without me knowing. I continued cleaning until it got pretty late, and the next day after work I continued. I was still kind of in shock with finding a secret room in my house, and decided to look at it once again. I opened the cabinet and went inside. Then I pulled the lever open just like I had the previous day. But this time, as soon as I opened it, I saw movement, and then saw a person for a split second. They slammed the door shut back on me, and I immediately turned and ran all the way out of my house to my car and then called the police. I was so scared that I started driving away as well. I opened up my phone, told the police the whole situation, and they came to my house a short time later to find that whoever had been there was now gone. I was absolutely disgusted knowing that this random person had access to my house for who knows how long. It felt like a vivid nightmare that I needed to wake up from. When I opened up my phone to call the police, it showed that the date was June 23rd, 2016. I still remember this date 7 years later. It stayed with me like a scar. I don't know if I will ever heal from it. Luckily for me, I moved out the next week. I really don't know how long the person was living in my secret room, but thankfully, they never gave me a problem. Thanks for reading my true horror story. As someone who has already experienced things like home invasion, I would always suggest that you lock your doors, because you can never know what people can do when they are in your house. I'm a 31-year-old female, and I used to work at a restaurant in my early 20s as a hostess. Back then, I was a people pleaser and didn't have the backbone that I have now. During my shift, there was a man in the bar area, which can be seen from my stand, who eventually approached me. He was in his 50s, probably 6'3", muscular, large build, dark hair, and he dressed well. When he approached, it started out as small talk. I can't remember the beginning of the conversation, but then he started asking me if I had considered a different job and said that I should come work for him, but he wouldn't tell me what he does. He started asking me for my phone number. I didn't feel comfortable giving this stranger my personal information, so I told him that he could call the restaurant and ask for me. I'm there a lot. He didn't like that answer. He continued asking, and I gave him the same answer. Finally, I told him that I'd give him my email. I gave him a fake email address on a piece of paper, obviously. I made it look real, but I wasn't interested in continuing the conversation because he was being very pushy, so I excused myself to the back. I remained friendly and smiled during the entire exchange because that was my job. After avoiding him for a while, I saw him going back and forth from the bathroom, eyes darting around the restaurant, head turning around every which way. He was clearly looking for me, and I was actively avoiding him. I started to get scared, thinking maybe he was trying to kidnap or traffic me or something, which didn't feel like a stretch because of the way that our exchange went. I decided to tell my manager that he was making me uncomfortable and told them what happened. However, I forgot to mention that I gave him a fake email address. My manager approached him and asked him to leave because he was making staff uncomfortable. This man argued with my manager in front of the entire restaurant. He was saying he just wanted to have a conversation and that was it. He refused to leave. I was standing there during the entire argument, and he pulls out the email address and says, "If I'm making her uncomfortable, why did she give me her email address?" and shoved it into our faces. Instead of explaining to him and my manager that it was a fake, I froze. I was angry and in complete disbelief of the situation. He eventually left, and my manager hated me after that. I left not long after, and to this day, that manager still doesn't know that the email was fake. I don't know why I never told her. I don't know why I froze. I don't know what that man wanted. I've thought a lot about it since then, and it was almost a decade ago. I'm glad that I didn't give him anything he wanted, but I wish that I could tell my younger self to stick to her guns and don't take stuff from anyone, especially a man who is using intimidation tactics to try and get what he wants, whatever that was. I was working at a small business in Iowa when a man came in for an interview. He was polite enough but didn't say much, but something just felt off. While my boss interviewed him, I stocked shelves, listening to the man answer our standard questions. What's your availability? Have you ever been arrested? Things like that. When he left, the manager asked me what I thought. There's something weird about him. I got really bad vibes. The boss kind of chuckled at me and said, "We can't deny someone employment because of bad vibes." I took out my phone and Googled the guy's name. He had been arrested a few months prior for threatening to shoot up a gas station after being accused of theft. He lied and said that he had never been arrested. Is that a good enough reason to not hire someone? It was, and it may have saved my life. I remember September 2018, a beautiful, clear day. The calmness broken by the sound of police cars flying down the road. A student had been murdered in the middle of the day on a nearby golf course. She had passed a group of men who very shortly later found her things abandoned on the ground. Concerned, they called management, and shortly after she was found, stabbed to death, her body floating in a pond. Everyone was in shock. This was the second murder of a young student Iowa had in just a few weeks. Was it a disgruntled golfer? A jealous lover? No. The young woman had simply been at the wrong place at the wrong time. She did not know her killer. He did not know her. He was a homeless man who was in the woods by a golf course, saw an opportunity and took it. He had a fantasy about R-wording and killing a woman. The next day, the story made headlines, and plastered on the front was the killer's face. My stomach turned when I saw him. He looked so familiar. I didn't recognize the name, but then again, I've never been good with names. But I remember stories. I Googled his name. The same story about a man being arrested for threatening to shoot up a gas station came up, and instantly I knew who he was. It was the same man that I had convinced my boss not to hire. At the job, the majority of the shifts, there was only one or two of us working. I would have been alone with this guy at so many points. So many slow hours, with few customers, so many blind spots, so many opportunities to be alone with him. It only took a few minutes for a murder to occur on a beautiful day at a golf course. So yes, trust your instincts. Hello, friends. So I came across some information about an old friend, which has left me, as the kids say nowadays, shook. I figured I'd make a post to sort through my thoughts and share a rather insane story. But before we get started, my name is Mikey, and I'm in my 20s. Also, I'd like to apologize for how overly sarcastic this post may seem. Humor is my defense mechanism. Trigger warning. This story mentions murder, but I don't go into much detail. Stay safe out there, friends. When I was an angsty teenager, I moved in with my mother and stepdad to escape a less than desirable situation. Because of the move, I was enrolled in a new school. This school was located in one of the sketchiest neighborhoods in the city. Everyone who resided in that area was relatively low income, my family included. We had a rec center near the school that was a hot spot for, let's call them undesirables, which was primarily teenage boys, wandering over from the nearby high school to catcall the girls. Lunchtime was my favorite. I loved going outside for chow and having sweaty teenage boys ask for the nasty. Note the sarcasm. Anyway, during my time at my crappy school, I made an array of friends. However, there was one person who became my best friend. Let's call her Blondie. She and I got along like... what's a negative connotation? I was a people pleaser, and she took advantage of that. Blondie was nice enough, but she was problematic. Regardless, we were fast friends and thus began our very short-lived friendship. Over the school year, she mainly came over to my house, since I was an only child. We usually had the house to ourselves, while my folks were at work. However, she finally invited me to her house around the middle of the school year. I was super excited. I had always wanted to meet her family since they were such an enigma. Blondie wasn't one to divulge information about her home life. All I knew was that she lived with her mother, stepdad, and a younger sibling. I'm unsure if she was embarrassed or didn't care to share, but I finally had the honor of meeting them. Honestly, her family was amazing. They were kind and treated me very well. Not to mention, her stepdad was a phenomenal cook. The best spaghetti and meatballs I've ever had. After that, I started going to her house more and more. And you know what? I really enjoyed it. Fast forward to a month or two before the end of the school year, and it's Blondie's birthday. Her family was throwing a little get-together at her house, and I was invited. Blondie and I headed over to her house after school, and it was really a fun time. Until near the end of the day. Now, I knew next to nothing about her biological father. I knew he wasn't really in the picture. He'd sometimes drop by and say hello, but I had never personally met him. This was until he had made a surprise visit to give Blondie a present. When I tell you there was a shift in the atmosphere, I kid you not. I could immediately feel it, and I was a dumb kid. We were inside the living room eating some cake, and there was a knock at the front door. Blondie's mom answered, and her face, which once had a smile, turned to a scowl. If looks could kill, the dude would be dead. She moved aside and this man walked in. I'll never forget how everyone in the room got tense except for Blondie, who excitedly greeted her dad. At the time, he seemed like a normal-ish dude. Maybe a tad bit on the creepier side, but who am I to judge? Blondie introduced me to her father, and we had shared some pleasantries. At one point, I was invited to get some ice cream with him the following day, which I accepted. I mean, I was getting free ice cream. Of course I was going to say yes. He eventually left, and we all got back to eating cake. I had honestly forgotten about the visceral reaction everyone had upon seeing him. Maybe if I remembered, I would have said no. Anyway, the following day rolled around, and I went for ice cream with Blondie and her dad. I can't remember much from that day other than him asking me if I had a boyfriend or girlfriend, which seems innocent enough. But the way that he asked me, it made me feel weird. I honestly can't remember much from my other encounters with this man. Nothing really jumps out to me. I know I went out with him and Blondie a few more times before my family moved to another city, and we lost touch. Fast forward a few years, and I'm attending college. I had managed to stay in contact with one person from my middle school days. Let's call her Teddy. She had reached out to me one day asking if I wanted to go to a movie, which I happily accepted. I was balls deep in the big sad at that time and needed to pick me up. A film with an old friend was just what I needed. I took the train to a nearby mall, and Teddy and I watched the movie. After, we headed to the food court and got some chow. We were catching up. It had been a couple of years since we last saw each other, when Teddy suddenly perked up. She asked me if I heard about Blondie's father, to which I said we hadn't been in contact since I had moved. Teddy's face lit up, and she told me the most mind-blowing story that my little brain had ever heard. She informed me that Blondie's father had murdered a woman. Now, before I continue, she was going based on word of mouth, while she was telling me all of the details. Teddy had no news articles or police reports to back her story. She was told by a friend who had heard from someone else and so on. But what she told me wasn't actually far from the truth. According to her, Blondie's father had taken the life of a street worker. He got away with it for 2 years, and his truck got him caught. Apparently, there was something unique about it. Teddy couldn't tell me much more because she genuinely didn't know. I remember going back to my dorm and trying to Google for more details, but I couldn't find a thing about it. I eventually forgot about the story until last year, 2023. I was discussing the craziest stories from my life with a friend when I suddenly remembered Teddy's story. After some digging, I finally found an article that described the crime. I clicked on it, and when I saw the picture of the man, well, words can't describe what I felt. Everything that Teddy told me was true, but it was so much worse than what she and I thought. Out of respect for the victim and her family, I won't describe what he did, but he was arrested 3 years after he had taken her life. I can't find any information about how he was caught, but it had something to do with his truck. He was charged with manslaughter. He took a plea bargain and indignity to a body, and only served 7 years of his 14-year sentence. He had served half already because he was in custody during the trial. I looked him up again not too long ago, and I learned some unsettling information which prompted me to write this post. He was released from prison a few months ago. Guess what he did? He killed another woman. From what I've read, it had similarities to the other murder that he committed. This time around, he's charged with second-degree murder and indignity to a body. There's unfortunately still not a lot of information about the second woman, but both of his victims were mothers. They were both cruelly taken from this world, and I can't wrap my mind around this at all. I met this monster. I was best friends with his daughter. I don't think that I was personally in any danger, but the fact that I met someone capable of such heinous crimes, it scares the living crap out of me. I can't even begin to imagine how Blondie must have felt after learning of her father's crimes. Anyway, I apologize for the length of the story and how vague I was regarding the crimes. I know that some of you really want to know everything, but it didn't feel right to share their story, especially since it had very little to do with me. I was just the schmuck that was friends with the daughter. Also, I would like to provide more information about how Blondie is, but I can't remember her last name for the life of me. She doesn't share the same one as her dad, but regardless, thank you for reading. I think someone just tried to kidnap me. I don't know what just happened. Seriously, I am freaked out and at a loss, thinking I'm either psycho or overreacting, or someone was legit trying to kidnap me or assault me. So I work pretty late most nights, and sometimes when I need something right away, I have no choice but to go to this store. That's the only one open late after work. Fast forward, I was driving home and noticed a car behind me super close with their lights bright as crap. I thought that it was a cop, but made a turn, and no, it was a small black sedan. Okay, weird. So I kept going my usual route and start noticing this car's flashing their brights behind me over and over and over while following me my whole route home. I know I didn't drop anything, because all I brought in the store was my keys and phone for Apple Pay. My trunk wasn't open. I was seriously getting weirded out, so I made a fast turn and started going 60 on this back road. I didn't even care about cops. I actually wanted to get pulled over. Well, this dude was right there behind me going 60 as well, still flashing his high beams. Finally, after about 10 minutes of this, there were these cops in the road doing construction, directing traffic. Then I looked back and he turned off right away. What just happened? Leaving my friend's house, I accidentally backed into a brick mailbox. My bike rack hit the mailbox, so my car was okay, but completely demolished the mailbox. No big deal, right? That's why we have insurance, right? I went to the neighbor and told him what happened, and gave them my insurance, phone number, and name. All I got was his first name. From the get-go, this dude was creepy. He kept hitting on me, trying to date me, specifically trying to feed me. I left on my drive to my mom's. I'm attending out-of-state college and my parents are divorced. The guy that I backed into, Robert, began to text me and call me. He was insistent that it was better for both of us to just pay out of pocket for the mailbox, sending me links to his companies that could fix it for $500, and demanding that I go on a date with him so that I could give him the cash for the repair and he could feed me. I don't know what his deal with the food was. I declined everything, but started to get annoyed by his constant texts and calls. Finally, after 2 days of it with my responses being only, "Please contact my insurance," I sent him a text saying that he was harassing me. I blocked him, but he made a new number and threatened to report it as a hit and run to the police. I'm in law school, okay? This wasn't a hit and run. I blocked the second number. Then he used a new number to ask me if I wanted him to send a screenshot or video of the accident to his insurance. I admit this made me angry. I called this number and dug my nails so hard into my thigh that I drew blood as he threatened reporting things, asking me on a date, and trying to entice me to just pay cash. I finally screamed, "Don't you contact me again, you piece of crap." My dad heard me and was upset that I said that to someone that I was in an accident with, and that I said that to a guy who thought that I was cute and just wanted a date. I blocked the third number. The next day, he reaches out again to tell me that I gave him the wrong policy number. I told him I didn't. He then said it'd be easier to pay cash, that I was the problem, etc. He was talking to his insurance, I guess, and began trying to validate my info. He had my mom's name, address, and phone number. I verified it, told him to not contact me again, and blocked his new number. The next morning, I got a super early text, basically saying that he finished the claim, and I was awful for making it harder than it needed to be by going through insurance and not going on a date with him. He then included, "You're so beautiful and ugly at the same time. Don't take risks. Stay on the good path. Goodbye." At this point, I got scared. 5th number blocked. Then at midnight, he texts, "You up? I know where you live. Don't try and screw me over on insurance. I'll report it as a hit and run. You should have just gone on a date with me." I took the phone to my dad, showed him the texts, and filled him in. My dad, a pretty scary dude, then calls the guy. He answered, "Shoot, I knew you were into me. Want to come over?" My dad got very mad. My dad said this was beyond harassment. This was his final warning to not contact me, that we didn't care how he reported it, etc. Robert began saying that I came onto him and offered my body as a payment, invited him to my house, and was a horny B word. Instantly blocked. Police contacted. Insurance notified. All the things. Next day, I talked to insurance. Protective order filed. I get another text telling me that I shouldn't have involved police. Blocked 7th number. Notify police. Go to stay at my dad's because dude doesn't have this address. My dad is a very tall, scary dude who loves his Second Amendment. Last night, watching Star Wars with my dad and older brother, the doorbell rings. Dad goes to see who it is, and it's Robert with a trash bag filled with things that I left at his house. I called the police. My dad goes ballistic. All the things. Police come and arrest the guy. Then the bag, lingerie, a knife, lip balm, an Edita Von Tess fetish book. I met with my attorney. Plot twist, the guy doesn't own the house. He's an illegal immigrant, is married, and is being deported. I feel awful that he's being deported. I genuinely think that he wanted to R-word and or kill me. I go back to school in a few days, and I'm terrified that he or someone else will follow me. Also, I've kept my friend, his neighbor, informed through the whole process. He hasn't reached out to her, except for video of me backing into the mailbox. I don't know if an illegal immigrant can be charged with crimes, but he was arrested for stalking, trespassing, felony assault. He tried to push my dad and then spat at him. Insurance fraud. He lied about the accident to his insurance agent. Possession of a deadly weapon with intent. The knife in the bag. And attempted breaking and entering. They just kept adding on the charges every time that he would do something new. I'm an 18-year-old female who used to live in Las Vegas before I moved recently. And if you don't already know, Las Vegas is number 2 on the sex trafficking list. I used to go out a lot to a late-night 7-Eleven and get snacks because I was bored and wasn't tired. The one closer to my home I got banned from, so I had to go to one a bit further away. I used to go by myself, and the walk there was creepy. Most of the streetlights don't work, and it's just dark and really creepy. This time I ended up getting ice cream and some kind of candy. Anyways, on my way back, I'm about to get to the crosswalk to get to the side my house was on, when I noticed a guy standing outside one of the other apartments complex. He wasn't there before, but some of the apartments are facing the street that I walk on. He started yelling something, but I wasn't sure that if he was talking to me or not, because I was on the phone with my boyfriend. I crossed the street and walked past him. Something felt off when I crossed the street and walked past him. He didn't say a word. The only time he had said anything was when I was across the street. Maybe he noticed I was on the phone. I kept walking and glancing behind me. Nothing too obvious. and then he started yelling and walking faster. That time, I knew that he was talking to me and knew that he was following me. I told my boyfriend, and he said just walk fast home and try to get home. Also, this guy was pimped out, like dressed like he was a pimp. Gold chains, expensive shoes and clothes, etc. And I say this because I didn't live in a great neighborhood, and you wouldn't see people dressed like that. Anyways, I noticed that he was speeding up every time I looked behind me. I started panicking because I was genuinely scared that something was going to happen. But another guy passes me. We say hello like casual, and the guy that was following me runs across the street. I was like, this dude just probably saved my life because he said hi to me. I also didn't know who he was at all. I got home safe, but I'll never get ice cream at night alone again.
I'm in the process of applying for a new job and started contacting various places to see if they were hiring and sending in my resume. About 3 weeks ago, I got a text from a director saying that texting would be easier to keep in touch about filling out my application and setting up interviews. I ended up meeting with him twice, one to see the facility and two for an interview, about 2 weeks ago. Since then, he's passively said things such as how pretty I am, that I would be a perfect fit, etc., but no actual updates on the job. He's also tried asking me out multiple times, but he tries to make it seem like we would be talking about the job. I've tried not to reply as much as possible, and have been ignoring him because I don't want to work with someone like that. Yesterday, he messaged me to tell me that he was sending flowers to my apartment building. I never gave him my address directly, but it was on my application. I said thanks, and then ignored him because I was freaked out. Today, he asks if we could meet up for coffee because he's in my neighborhood. I didn't respond. About 2 hours later, I took my dog for a walk, passed by a coffee shop that is 2 streets over from my apartment building, and he was sitting in a booth right next to the window. We didn't make direct eye contact, and I honestly couldn't tell exactly if it was him. I kept walking, and he almost immediately texted me, asking if that was me that he just saw. / did I want to come back to the coffee shop? I didn't reply. I live in a huge city, so what are the chances that he was at a coffee shop in my neighborhood, that close to my apartment just by chance? Was he just waiting for my response that whole time? Am I being paranoid about being stalked? Sorry if this is all over the place, and I'm posting from a burner because you can tell what city I live in from my regular account. I'm a 21-year-old girl taking her first backpacking trip around the world. I only arrived in Thailand 2 days ago, and it was unfortunate that I almost got kidnapped on my first night. I went to Bangla Road, which is well known, and had a few beers at a bar, and then went to the popular club Illusion. I was having a good time, dancing and meeting people. In the club, I only had 3 drinks, tequila and orange juice. But at some point, I realized that I was a lot more drunk than expected. I don't know if it was spike, but I was dumb and had my drink on the table next to me while I was dancing, and it was very crowded. In total, over the space of 3 hours, I only had 2 beers plus 3 tequilas. Usually, that's an okay amount for me to be aware. I went to the bathroom and felt very intoxicated and threw up. Upon leaving the bathroom, a guy who I do not know grabbed my arm. He seemed young, and I asked him what he was doing. He said he would help me down the stairs. After we got down to the road, he dragged me down to an alley and put me in his car. I was really scared at this point and didn't know how I'd gotten myself into a bad situation so quickly. I'm very small, and not very strong, so it was easy for him to take control of me. He started driving, and I kept saying no, 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 and to stop. But he said, "Don't worry, I'm taking you somewhere safe," which in my mind was so scary. I had maps open, and we were driving out of Patong. Finally, after some time, I started telling him that I would throw up all over him and his car if he didn't pull over. This seemed to annoy him, and he pulled over. The second he stopped the car, I got out and ran down the street. Luckily, there was a motorbike taxi who asked if I needed a lift, and I jumped on and told him where my hotel was. I could see the guy walking down the road after me as we sped away. I made it back to my hotel safely. Honestly, after that, I'm not going to any bars or clubs alone. I don't trust anyone, and I'm feeling very vulnerable. At least it was a lesson that I need to be a lot more careful. I'm just glad that I made it out okay. I grew up in the 1990s, born in the late 80s, and I remember getting my first bike and starting to explore the area in which I grew up in upstate New York. Where I grew up is much different now in the 90s. It was more rural with clusters of neighborhoods here and there. I lived near an old capped landfill, and the main road connected a lot of semis down to some factories in a neighboring town that was like a 5-minute bike ride. We also had an old Baptist church that was founded by an eccentric former hippie who was really good to the community. My dad, who was a very serious drinker, loved to fish, hunt, etc., with his friend because it gave him an excuse to drink and kill something. But he ended up making this deal with this pastor and the gentleman who owned it a pond behind the church to stock it with fish, as at the time, my dad and his friends started becoming very serious competitive fishers and went in on a boat, which my dad had to sell his share to eventually keep drinking. So, my friends and I had permission to fish there in the summer, and we would go down and swim and stuff like that. I lived easily less than 5 minutes from this pond, and my friends and I go out there one summer day. This was around 1995. My mom had heard on the news a week prior about a wave of kidnappings. I don't remember if Amber Alerts were a thing then, so she decided to make a code word with me. She came to me and told me that if anyone ever tried to convince me that they knew my mom or dad, in hopes to get me in their car, to ask them for the code word. Ours was pickles. So fast forward to our fishing trips. My friends leave before me after we sat around and actually just swam more than anything. My friend Dennis got mad because he was serious about fishing, so he and his brother left, and I was alone on the road. And this road, once you got past this farm, was a straight shot to the main part of town, and our road was on the right just before the road ended. So I get to my road, and I'm about to turn, and I didn't notice that I was being followed by a beige-collared pickup with this Cletus-looking guy from The Simpsons in it. He greets me and tells me that my mom and dad are waiting for us at this local restaurant which I knew. He tells me that they asked him to come to get me and to meet them there so that we can all have dinner. I immediately thought of what my mom said and started getting this evil feeling like I was in danger. So I told him that my parents specifically have a password that they give their friends, and that if he was their friend, he was required to tell me, at which point he got mad and started swearing at me. Although I didn't see one, but I was certain he had a gun, and he started fumbling in the truck. I turned and started paddling down my road, screaming for help, and that I was in danger. He jerked his truck to follow, that I was making too much noise and was already to my house that he just took off. When I got home, my mom was home, and I was hysterical and asked her why she would ask such a mean friend to pick me up. And I told her what happened, and she didn't believe me. And she calmed me down, told me that I did the right thing, but could tell that I was having a hard time. She also grew up in the same town, and nothing like that had ever happened to her. A few days later, a friend of hers told her a similar story about her son on another part of town. The police then were involved, and the cops came and talked to me, and I gave them the same description of the man, the truck, what had happened, etc. I don't know if the guy was ever caught. I used to be very bitter at my mom for not believing me, but I now understand the confusion that she had, and instead of reacting, she just tried to console me and keep an eye on everything. My dad, on the other hand, was more vigilant about it, and would ask me all the time when he'd take me out if someone looked like the guy in the truck, and if they looked like the same truck that I saw. I just hope that no other kids were harmed by him. I'm a 30-year-old female, and I used to live in a small neighborhood from ages 13 to 18. This took place when I was around 15. I spent most of my time just walking around the neighborhood listening to my MP3 player. Wow, I feel old just typing that. There was a guy around the same age as me that lived maybe 5 or so houses down from me. From neighborhood gossip, I learned that he was homeschooled and had been in and out of juvie due to his anger issues. He was almost always outside, and sometimes when I passed his house, he would start following me. I was smart enough to always have my own music down low enough to be able to hear and be aware of my surroundings. At first, I just passed it off, as he ended up walking the same time of day I did. Looking back, I was truly dumb. As time passed, he got closer and closer to me when following, until he eventually decided to come up right behind me. He said some truly heinous things that I will not repeat here. I mean, he was right in my ear when he was talking. I ran home and told my sister. She was basically who raised me. She told me I was lying and to stop making up stories. For a while, I stopped going out walking, until I needed the fresh air and exercise, and tried again after maybe 2 months. Sure enough, there he was, and came right up behind me and started to say things again. I turned my music up and ignored him. This is what I continued to do every day until he got tired of me ignoring him, I guess. Because one day, he grabbed my arm. I couldn't get away, and then he grabbed the back of my neck and told me that I should know better than to ignore him. Again, I told my sister. She didn't believe me, and I stopped going out again. 2 weeks later, I woke up to loud bangs on my bedroom wall. There was a garage on both sides of the house, and the wall of my bedroom shared a wall with one of the garages. This garage was unfinished. There wasn't even concrete down, and it was easily accessible from outside, as it was missing the other door at the back of the house. My sister was out of town, and my dad was deaf and bedridden, so it was just me in the house, able to do anything. My bedroom also had a door to go outside, so I ran over and locked it. I laid down and waited for the banging to stop, but it didn't. My cousin and her boyfriend lived down the street, so I called her, and she sent her boyfriend down to see what it was. Her boyfriend pulled right into the backyard and right up to the door into the garage. His headlights filled the garage, and out ran the guy from down the street, holding a large knife. He took off running, and my cousin's boyfriend followed. It was at this time that I called the police. They came and took a statement, but there was nothing they could do because other than going into the garage and trespassing, he didn't actually do anything. I never took a walk in that neighborhood again. I still wonder how he knew what wall to bang on. How did he know that I was on the other side of it? How did he know that my sister was gone? or that my dad was bedridden and couldn't do anything. I never locked the door, so had he been able to get into my house, who knows what would have happened? What would have happened if I had gone outside? It still gives me the creeps. So, guy down the street, let's not meet again. This incident took place in the summer of 2023. Last year, I transferred with my company to take a new position in a major Midwestern city. My spouse was still working and living back in California for the next few months. So, I rented a studio apartment for myself in a newly renovated apartment building in a popular downtown neighborhood until we could look for a place together. The apartment was small but nice. It was in a secure building with interior hallways and a nice downstairs lobby. I was one of the first tenants to move into this newly renovated building, and other new residents soon started moving in. A major advantage of this move was that I'd only be a couple of hours' drive from my hometown and my parents. I started my new job, and everything was going great. I was enjoying my new neighborhood, and the neighbors in the apartment building generally kept to themselves like I did. Then, a new guy moved in across the hall, and everything changed. We'll call him David. David was a single man in his 60s, and was very different from the college students and young professionals who lived in our building. I started noticing his erratic behavior almost immediately. I would come home from work, and he would be sitting in his car in our small parking lot, just staring off in the distance. We were having issues that summer with smoke clouds coming over from the vast Canadian wildfires. They were leaving a light dusting of ash on our cars, similar to pollen. David was convinced that someone was spraying this dust on his car and was accusing various tenants he would run into in the parking lot. He would hoard trash in his apartment and leave trash bags in the hallway, causing a foul odor. He would also be yelling to himself in the hallway. I finally had enough and complained to the leasing office. The manager was quick to dismiss my concerns, saying that she'd been in his apartment and everything was fine. In August, my parents' 50th anniversary was coming up, and I was excited to go home and spend a weekend with them. A few days before their anniversary, my boss informed me that he would be flying in to work on an important project with me that would have us working through the weekend. I was really disappointed and felt like I was letting my parents down. But I managed to get away for a quick overnight trip in the middle of the week to see them and get back before my boss was due to arrive. I drove down and spent the night with them. The next morning, I checked my email as I was getting ready to head back. There was an email from my apartment manager in regard to the incident the night before. The email was very vague, but it stated that a resident was dead, and there would be further details coming later. My heart sank and I immediately went pale. My mind instinctively went to my strange neighbor David. I opened up a local news app for my city, and the top story was about an active shooter in my apartment building who was killed during a SWAT team standoff the night before. Apparently, David approached my next-door neighbor in the hallway with a gun and threatened to shoot him. The neighbor ran into his apartment and called 911. David also called 911 and told the dispatcher that his neighbors were hacking his phone, and if the police didn't come, he was going to start shooting people. The police came and tried to talk to David, but he had barricaded himself in his apartment and claimed to be heavily armed. The state police and the SWAT team soon arrived, and David began firing a rifle out his window at anyone he saw in the parking lot below. All of the neighbors on my floor were trapped in their apartments with no way of escape. They had to get down and barricade themselves from the gunfire. There was another building across the street with a direct line of sight into our apartment building. A police sniper took a position in the building across the street and shot David through his window. Then they flew a drone into his open window and confirmed that he was dead with a gun still in his hand. Luckily, no one else was injured. I got home later that day to a bullet-riddled apartment building,
and several neighbors who normally didn't speak to each other were hugging and crying and showing each other videos of the incident from their hiding places. I've never been so lucky to have been out of town. If my boss hadn't messed up my plans, I would have been home that night. I'm sorry David didn't get the mental health attention he needed, but he put so many lives in danger. So this started about 2 to 3 years back. I had just experienced a terrible breakup, and I started receiving these disturbing phone calls. It started simple. The first call I answered, and the person on the other end said how much they miss me. Now I have a very small circle of friends, and I'm not on Facebook or any social site where I update my photos or daily activities. This is important. And I know that the ex that I just split up with had nothing to do with the following. Apologies, it's not short. The first call, like I said, was simple. They said they missed me. I asked who it was and they said it's me. Don't you remember? So I hung up and they immediately called back, crying, upset that I was being mean. The caller was clearly an adult male, but they were talking as though they were a very young child, around 6 years old. I hung up again, and they didn't call back. Looking back, I should have blocked the number. But as I mentioned, I just got blindsided by a breakup, and I wasn't thinking very well. Then they kept calling. They would call, and if I didn't answer, they left messages, saying how pretty I looked with my blue sweater that day, or that they knew how I took my coffee now, and said that they would remember it for when we finally went out for a drink together. I blocked the numbers. They would call from another. I answered one day, yelling at them to leave me alone, and hung up again. When they called back, it wasn't the boy, but his mother. She was very upset, said that I was hurting her boy by not wanting to play, and you could very clearly hear the boy crying and screaming in the background. At this point, it dawned on me that this wasn't a joke or a prank or something like that. There was something seriously wrong with these people, and they were obviously watching me. For a few weeks following my breakup, I had to live in my car. The entire time, I hardly slept. I was terrified, thinking that I would wake up one day and see them standing outside of one of my windows. When I finally got a place, he called me to congratulate me, and he couldn't wait to come play. I haven't heard from these people for about a year now, but I checked my phone after a very busy workday and noticed 10 missed calls, and I'm terrified to check my voicemail. I've reached out to cops, but they won't do anything since I haven't been explicitly threatened, and I've been advised to just block calls. I'm going to change my number, but I'm terrified that the calls will continue even after that, and that it will upset them even further. I posted this on the advice subreddit, and people have been kind to reach out with advice and tips. But I feel like I'm living in a horror movie. It was a Friday night, and I had gone to bed early, as I had work on Saturday morning. After reading in bed for a bit, I drifted off at around 10:30 p.m., only to wake up about an hour later to loud screams and people yelling profanities. I thought that my girlfriend was watching a movie with the volume way up, and I went out into the lounge room to ask her to turn it down a little. Instead, the TV was off, and my girlfriend was staring at the front door with her eyes wide. Our apartment is on the ground floor of the building, so our front door opens directly out into the lobby of the building. The voices in question were coming directly from the lobby. I couldn't make out specifics. In my defense, I was half asleep, and the language of the country that I live in is not my first language. But there was a lot of swearing involved. My first thought was that it was some kind of domestic dispute. But after listening, I realized that it was a group of men that sounded extremely aggressive. I looked at the WhatsApp group chat for my apartment building, and to my horror, I saw a message from one of the people in it that there were armed men in the building and that we should not leave our flats. The country that I live in is experiencing a marked uptick in crime, and I had heard stories of armed groups of men robbing entire apartment blocks, but these had seemed fairly apocryphal to me. However, that was my first thought, that these men would kick down our door and rob us. One of my dogs started to growl at the commotion outside. I shushed him, and thankfully he obeyed. I heard a commotion in the apartment above me and went out to my patio to see what was happening. I heard what sounded like a large piece of furniture being knocked over, and women and children screaming in terror. At this point, I had no idea what was going on, but I knew that by now they would have robbed us already, if that is what they had planned to do. My girlfriend and I decided to hide in a small shed at the end of our patio, monitoring the group chat on our phones. Our bigger dog silently stood watch outside of the door of the shed, his eyes locked on the sliding door at the end of the patio. I would find my smaller dog later, cowering between the washing machine and the dryer. After 10 extremely tense minutes, I heard the screeching of tires, signaling what I hoped was the perpetrators fleeing the scene. Eventually, someone in the group chat said that the police had arrived, and breathing a huge sigh of relief, I came out of hiding and opened the front door. Alarmingly, on the floor of the lobby, there were zip ties that had been cut, and the security guard was talking to one of the tenants. The man was bleeding from a large gash on his face and looked extremely shaken. Over the next few hours, the story would unfold. The man that I saw with the gash on his face was the tenant in the upstairs apartment, the one that I had heard the commotion coming from. He was the owner of an import/export business, and for whatever reason had a sizable sum of money in cash hidden in his apartment. Someone had obviously found out about it and planned out the robbery that woke me from my sleep on Friday night. A group of 8 men had followed him into his apartment building's garage and ambushed him as he got out of his car, and judging from the gash on his face, roughed him up a little bit. Some of the group of 8 had gone to the lobby, surprised the security guard and zip-tied him. The remainder of the group had gone up to the apartment, robbed it, and then fled the scene. It's fairly chilling to think that armed men were meters from my front door. So, to the armed men that stormed my apartment building to steal my neighbor's cash, let's not meet. This happened while in my early 20s. My best friend was always getting into some risky stuff. While she did various drugs, I was always more of a pothead. When they said that pot was a gateway drug, I believe it's true to a certain extent with those who have addicted personalities. She definitely developed an addiction issue later on. My friend, her name was Kay, was always down to meet new people. She used to friend random people on Facebook or Instagram. She would ask me to hang out so that when they left, she met people and I was the buffer, just in case they didn't like each other. One day, she came over to my house unannounced and was like, "Hey, let's go to my uncle's house," because her aunt was there, and her aunt had some goods. Her aunts happened to be down the road. Her aunt and her uncle were known as dealers in the area, so we went. When we got there, she was like, "Hey, I met this guy online. He goes by Joey Crack." Then she shows her aunts his pictures, and a wide-set man with a red goofy face, cornrow braids, face tattoos, and a gold grill. I laughed and said, "Wow, Kay, you really know how to pick 'em." She had already invited him over, so upon his arrival, he then comes out of nowhere, just walks right up to Kay, gives her a hug, and everyone else there a kiss on the cheek. This part of town, there was nothing around, just houses, a school, and woods. The closest store was about 20 minutes away, so it struck me as odd that he walked there. So it was me, Kay, her aunt, and the aunt's friend.
We sit and get 3 joints in a rotation. By this time, both aunts are high as a kite on coke, and they take a few puffs, then go inside the house, leaving me, Kay, and Joey Crack outside. Joey then starts asking us questions like how we know each other, what we do for a living, etc. It was getting late, so I was telling her that I was wanting to go home. She was like, "No, don't go yet." I told her I was tired and that Joey is weird, and he kept low-key hitting on me. She then tells me that he had asked to sleep with her, and he wanted to ask her if I was down. I laughed it off and said, "Are you crazy?" And after a while of silence, I deflected and heard some noise that was in the darkness. "Did you hear that?" After a bit of small talk between him and Kay, he then learnt that neither of us was interested. It was just a hangout. This then turns the mood. You could feel it. It was suddenly eerie. He got reserved and shifty-eyed. I sat down for a while just to please Kay. At one point, I turned to Joey, knowing that he walked here and it was kind of dark by now. "What are you about to do? Because I'm about to go home and Kay's coming with me." He was like, "I just texted my boy. He's about to come get me." When he was texting, Kay was right behind him, watching him text. Her eyes grew wide and she looked at me. That was silent girl code for what the heck. Kay broke the silence and was like, "Hey, come help me get this thing from inside to bring it out." So I did. We went inside, and she was like, "I'm going to call my uncle so that he can take us to your place." And I was like, "Why?" My house was like a 10-minute walk. She said, because when she was looking at Joey's text, he sent to whoever was coming to pick him up the information of all of us here. He noted that our aunts were high on coke, as us along with our age. He was telling his boy to come over to basically rob and R-word us, and called dibs on the blonde one. I was the blonde one. Every hair stood up on my body with the thought of some gross goon trying to have his way with me. I was mad, because she got me into this. We came back out and continued our conversation with him so that he wouldn't get suspicious of us. She mentions out loud that her uncle was on his way home. As he pulls in, a sigh of relief comes over me. They speak briefly, and Joey then departs into the darkness before his ride even shows up. Kay and I get a ride from her uncle to my house. On the ride, we noted how weird Joey was. Later that night, as I was going back to bed, I checked my Facebook, and I have a friend request from Joey and a message. "You're so pretty. I would love to have some alone time with you without your friend." The message ended with his number. I never blocked someone so fast. And after this, Kay didn't learn a lesson, but that's another story for another time. A week later, Joey was in the news. He was wanted for SA, robbery, and drug possession. A bullet well missed on my part. Joey Crack, let's never meet again. Okay, so for context for this story, I live in a pretty rural area. We live on the outskirts of our town, which already is small compared to the populations of the other towns in California. We're about 15 minutes from the small town and 40 minutes from the main city. We live down a dirt road with some neighbors. Our house has no other fences attached to ours, and on 2 sides of the house is only fields and dirt roads, one side having a single house in the field. The other 2 sides have a couple neighbors down other roads, and nobody really interacts out here except my dad talking to 2 of them sometimes. I was probably 12 when this happened. I had low self-esteem, and I wanted to start exercising more. I had been enrolled in a charter school due to bullying. Yes, that played into my self-esteem, but let's get on with the story. So I didn't really have many ways of exercise besides a treadmill that we owned. I wanted to start getting fresh air too, so my mom suggested that since we live out here, that it would be peaceful to take walks down the back dirt road.
I agreed, even though I was stubborn about it half the time. But we began walking, and usually would go in the mid to late afternoon when it would start cooling down outside, but was still light. In case it got dark, we took our flashlight too. Being out here, it was notorious for stray dogs to sometimes make their way out here, and we would carry pepper spray and a mini bat, just in case one got vicious. However, a dog will play into this story. One day, me and my mom decided to go on a walk in the later afternoon. So me and my mom took off and started walking down the road. When you walk about a quarter of a mile down the road, you start to come towards a little cross section. There's a road going left to the highway, a road going right to the neighbor's house, or the road goes straight down to a utility road. Me and my mom discussed walking down the utility road to get a good walk in, since it went on for a while. When we started getting to the crossroad, this dog came out of literally nowhere. We were looking at it, and it was in the center of the road staring at us. Me and my mom looked at it, and my mom said that she got this feeling in her stomach that we needed to turn around and walk home. So she grabbed my arm and started leading me back home, and then let go so that we could walk. We were in the midst of walking when she looks ahead and stops to stare at something. I ask what she's looking at, and she points. A white car pulled up to our fence and quickly backed up and shot down the road on the side of our house. Mind you, nobody ever goes down this road except one old man that we know. Anyone else who does usually is scoping out my dad's tools to steal. My mom said she felt a bit uneasy because of it and pulled me to the edge of the dirt road, almost into the field. The car had driven to the highway and left, or so we thought. We continued walking back to our house when this car comes back and drives down the road we were walking alongside. I caught a glimpse, and it was this smaller white car with black tinted windows that you couldn't see through. My mom instantly got a feeling of impending doom and pulled me into the field. Not too far, but far enough. We kept walking through the field towards our house, getting closer now, when this car comes back down the road. My mom stops me in my tracks to see what the car is doing, and it drives back to our house and starts driving around it super fast. For context, we have a random road and area that goes around our yard on our property. My mom waits until the car drives back down the side road, and she tells me we need to start running, so that's what we did. We started running through the field, getting to one of the little sections near my yard. The car comes back and drives down the road trying to cut us off. Me and my mom are panicking at this point and have no idea who this is and why they're acting like this. The car circles around again, and my mom drags me to further to the right, I think, of where we were and told me we're going to run down into the ditch. We get down in the ditch and the car comes back around and pulls to the edge of the ditch where we were. The front of the car was facing us, and all I could think about was if it drove down, it would hit me and my mom and probably kill us. My mom quickly put her arm in front of me and stood dead still while I was literally horrified and dropped our flashlight and I think my water bottle. The car was getting ready to drive down where we were, and then suddenly they backed up and drove around the yard, going back down the side road to the highway. Me and my mom felt like our souls left, and she tells me to run, don't look back, and get to the front gate. I run up the ditch, feeling my heart pounding. I run around the yard and towards the front gate, flinging it open, and I started running towards the front door. I did not hear my mom behind me. I was running to the door to open it right when I looked over and saw the car coming back down the side road. I ran into the house, trying to catch my breath. I saw the car drive down the road, and I didn't see my mom, so I was panicking. I ran towards the sliding glass door, and suddenly my mom comes running towards it and flings it open, running in and locking it. She tells me to go lock the front door while I try to catch my breath and tell her I was scared because I had no idea where she was. She went to chug some water from the fridge and told me that when I was running, she was trying to shut the front gate when she noticed the car coming back down the road. She said she knew she wouldn't have time to follow me to the door, so she ran behind my sister's car to stay out of view of the car, and when it drove back down the road, she took the opportunity to run to the back door since it was closer to my sister's car. It's crazy to think that if we hadn't seen that dog standing there in the road and decided to turn back, that we may have been run down. Fortunately, we haven't seen the car again and think it may have just been some crazy person or druggie who just so happened to come down our road that day.
I don't know how long this will be. It took me about 4 days to actually be able to type this out. I got weird mini anxiety attacks when I tried. I'll be the first person to admit that I have a very can't happen to me complex. And that's kind of what occurred in this story. I'm a university student and live in a rental house with 5 other people. It's far from ideal, but in this housing outcry that we're living in, it takes that sting off of us having to pay a bunch of money a month to exist in a box. This has relevancy, I swear. I got extremely lucky last weekend when the 5 of the roommates that I had were all out for the weekend. This has never happened, so I was ecstatic to have the house to myself. I did the whole 21-year-old girl home alone stuff that you can think of, watching the movie with the volume loud, taking really long showers, walking around the house in my pajamas, etc. It was around 10 p.m. I had finished some homework and was relaxing with a glass of wine and watching some streaming services. It sounded briefly like there was something moving on the porch. We've had a fox in our yard before, and the thing used to make a lot of noise on our porch, so I assumed that to be the case. After hearing some fumbling the second time, I went over to check through the window. There was nothing there. As I'm turning to head back to the living room, a piece of cement flies through our kitchen window. I didn't know it was cement at the time, but not important. I think I peed myself a little when it happened, but I definitely screamed like a little girl. My moronic self started unlocking the door to go outside, but common sense seized control of me yet again and locked the door back. I also ran to the back door to make sure that it was still locked, even though it's glass and wouldn't make a difference. Oddly enough, at this time, my grandma's words came into my head about something her own mother had told her. If someone tries to break into your house, turn the lights off. You know the inside of your house better than they do. I shut the lights off in the living room and managed to turn the TV off, which was hard because my hands were shaking. My dad used to give me and my siblings advice on protection measures, which were not resonating at this time. I secured myself in my upstairs bedroom, roast me if you want to, and had turned all the lights out in the house as I passed them. While walking up the stairs, I could hear the doorknob shaking furiously from the front door. I don't know if there was more than one person, or if they realized that they couldn't jump the fence to get into the backyard. While calling for emergency services on speaker, I secured my hunting knife to the end of my hockey stick with hot pink duct tape. I know that's probably one of the most Canadian things that I could say. If I was going to have to use it, at least it would look fabulous. I stayed in the dark holding my makeshift spear for what was probably about 15 minutes. I'm really glad that I wasn't being murdered in that amount of time. The operator told me that police were coming, which they eventually did. Took a very unsettling amount of time. The only reason I left the bedroom in the first place was because I heard knocking on the door downstairs, and I saw the police lights were flashing through the window. Otherwise, someone would have had to have come in and physically pull me out of the room. A statement was given, but that's all they did. Literally all they did. Nothing else. Just that. A very nice female officer stayed with me in the house and helped me clean up the glass until my brother showed up to bring me to his place for the rest of the weekend. So, shout out to Officer Cutie with her tattoos. I made an appointment with a doctor to get out on anxiety medication, as well as medicine for nightmares. I know that I wasn't in any physical danger at that point, but I've had some very charming dreams about similar scenarios, and I was just finding it easier to stay awake. Maybe that's juvenile of me, but I'm human. The meds are working fine, and I'm back at my house with wall-to-wall people again. And honestly, I don't hate that so much anymore. Please, have a fun and safe weekend. Never move in with a man or woman that you've never personally known. I got a roommate from hell this way. The man tortured me psychologically when I turned down his advances, then stole thousands of dollars from me over time. He even used my Amazon account to open up an account. He got some of my personal info like social security number and stuff like that as well. Once I left after calling the cops to help me leave, he showed up at the Apple store that I was just at a day after I left. Even though I left to go live on the streets, no family or friends as I was severely abused as a kid. I've been on my own since 14 actually, so I'm accustomed to surviving on the streets for periods of time. I was a million times happier than I ever was in his nice apartment, surrounded by nice things and a fancy car. I felt so relieved even just living in a concrete garage. I was a million times happier sleeping on a concrete with a pillow made of a towel and a tiny little blanket in the cold and heat than I ever was living there with him. He spent his time psychologically torturing me, and I don't regret leaving at all. He would bang on the wall across from mine every morning and late at night to startle me awake. He'd throw pebbles or tap on my window in the middle of the night to scare me and keep me on edge. He'd give me weird little candies and teddy bears as if we were dating. Even ordered stalkerish love items from my own Amazon account. Who the heck spends this much on a Christmas ornament that says, "I'll always love and follow you," or something along those lines? If I'd go to the restroom, he'd run and kick his foot at the door so loud and suddenly that it sounded like a door being kicked down. He'd steal my items if I left them alone for even a second, so I'd have no way to go out if I had plans. Then he'd put them back once I mentioned them, or when it was too late for me to leave for my plans. He kept me home this way. If I got any mail or a package, he'd interrogate me. "What did you order? I need to know." Like he owned me or something. Towards the end, I was leaning doors and furniture up against the door because he picked my bedroom lock before I was gone. And when I'd wake up, sometimes there was stuff missing or moved in odd ways, so I knew that he was creeping around while he was asleep. He was an absolute freak. I wouldn't put anything past him since he showed me how psychotic he was. If I was happy or in a good mood, he'd start criticizing and nitpicking at my body, hair, face, behavior, voice, anything that he thought that I was insecure about. I even developed an ED because he always did this and mocked/laughed at me when I would make or eat food. Anytime I'd leave my bedroom, he would rush out of his room to stand right behind or near me like a weird little dog that follows you around panting. He'd throw out food that I just bought, steal my cash, and even use my debit cards. He even ordered 30 to 40 plus items off of my Amazon account without my knowledge or consent. It was the strangest thing. If anyone else had dealt with this, they'd go insane. I still have trouble believing this stuff happened, as it was just so crazy to even think that someone is that crazy to do something like this. So I've never posted on this subreddit, though I have other stories that I've buried deep until recently. That this is happening in the present. I've had people stalk and follow me before, and because of that and my true crime addiction, I've become supremely paranoid and a solid curtain twitcher. I'm a 31-year-old female, and I reside in an upstairs room that was my first room to myself as a child. I had to leave a bad situation and therefore ended up back at my childhood home. For reference, when our house was built, we were told that the field to our left, with
horses in a barn at the time, would one day soon be a development. It was 2000 when we were told that, and it wasn't until 2022 that roads were being formed and foundations laid. I had already had someone follow me home before when I was young. I posted about it, but I don't know how to link it. But I was in a different bedroom next door. My parents put in a free library that's right below my window, and nighttime security lights that are very bright and turn on and you're within like 20 foot of the side of my house my room is on. I'll admit, having an open field next to me so long made me accustomed to not closing the curtains when I change, because there was never anyone to watch. But now there is. For the past 2 weeks, the burglar lights next to the free library have been going off late at night. Because my one side of the curtain is open, so I can use my vape. That's the only reason I noticed it at all. I didn't think too much at first. We lock all the doors and windows every night, and I'm on the second floor. I also always looked out to see if it was a car, someone walking their dog or a deer, only to see nothing. To add, they put in a crap ton of streetlights around this area, so visibility is great. But it just kept happening. So last night I did my usual, and I saw the lights come on out of my peripherals. I acted natural, giving full view out the window that I was going to bed. It was about 3 a.m., turning the TV off, closing the window and curtains, turning the light out, etc. Then I ducked down, peering through the curtains to the sidewalk below. I honestly thought that I was going to pass out when after a few minutes, maybe 5, someone comes out from the side of my house, all silhouette, dressed in black. They kept their back to me until the light turned off, but I swear I could still see them standing there, looking up like they could see me. I called the police, but while I was on the phone with the operator, I saw him run off. There wasn't much they could do, except say they'd drive a car around and look. My parents are asleep, and I know that I have to tell them tomorrow. This scares the crap out of me. If it hadn't been happening for weeks and was a solo incident, I would probably be fine about it. But the fact that the light has been going off without me seeing activity, and what happened last night, makes me think this person has been watching me, and watching my house. To the person outside my window, let's please never meet. Small update. I did tell my parents, and at first they brushed me off, claiming I'd had a couple of drinks and it was late, so I probably just saw someone checking out the library. I then had another conversation about it with my dad, who said that there had been reports in the last couple of weeks of car break-ins, and since my car is parked on my side of the street right outside my window, maybe they were trying to break into it. I pointed out that if he was trying to get into my car, why was he pressed up against the house where he wasn't visible from my window? And why did he at no point go towards my car? I think I freaked him out enough that we are going to potentially get a camera for that area. Given all the development happening around us, I think it's smart, even without this incident. Thank you all for your advice and replies. I'll update here again if anything happens. This story takes place in the Balearic Islands of Spain around 2007. As every late August, my mom, grandma, aunt, and I would book a trip to Mallorca. We're all from northeastern Spain, but love the sun just as much as Brits do. Anyway, our room overlooked the sea. It was located on the first floor. I had just turned 8 years old, and every night for a week we would enjoy the nightlife from our terrace. It was our 5th night in, and since there would be different booths at night where you could get tattoos, personalized jewelry, etc., just underneath the terrace, we would sit and watch people get stuff done like hair, tattoos, etc. There's this guy getting a tattoo. He's sitting in a weird position, so he can't really see what's going on with his girlfriend. My mom notices that some random guy starts groping her. She's obviously uncomfortable and her boyfriend doesn't know what's going on at all. He's completely oblivious.
Mom doesn't know any English besides very basic words, so she starts shouting, "Hey, stop." Mallorca is filled with foreign tourists, and they all look foreign to us, the perpetrator and the couple. So that's why she started shouting in English. The guy notices and stops groping her, but gives us a deathly stare. He then starts again, and now we're all shouting stop from our terrace. People start to notice there's something wrong, and keep looking at us in a weird way. He then freaks out and tries to get in our hotel. Thankfully enough, he couldn't get in because you needed a code in order to do that. However, 2 German girls were about to use that same door to get out, so we started to shout no, no. This dude kept leaving and coming back to see if he could come up with a way to get in. We didn't know what his intentions were, but we were all pretty shaken. We went to the front desk and eventually called the police to let them know that there was a man who was desperately trying to get into our room. All I remember is crying and thinking that I was going to get kidnapped or something.